I'll just start by welcoming all of you to this really wonderful panel, the idea of creative community and performance. It is just myself today. Lars isn't here, but hopefully I'm enough. So I'm going to introduce our first contributor, who is Anna de Claes. We're thinking about the idea of dance and the concepts of in communitas, but I'll let Anna speak about her presentation and where that's coming from. So Anna, my camera and mic are going to go off. Please begin.
Okay. Thank you. So my name's Anna. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Chichester, where I was studying a master's there. Previous to that, I was working as a science teacher. So my background is actually in science, but I decided to have a career change when I was approaching 30 and kind of come back to my passion, which was dance. So the title of my master's thesis was Communitas in Times of Transition, sharing experiences of dance to reflect community and inform the creation of an intergenerational choreographic work. The photo that you can see on the left is taken from a live art installation that I created in September 2020. So to go through why I decided to carry out this research, it stemmed from 4 places really. So firstly, a personal interest. Coming from a teaching background, I'd always been interested in how I can foster a sense of community in a classroom setting, and then in a wider school community as well. Also having worked as a youth worker in seasonal roles, community was always something that I was very passionate about. Secondly, from personal experience, I lived in Spain for 4 years and I was part of a salsa dance community there. And when I embarked on my master's, I reflected a lot on how I really gained a sense of community there, and I was very interested in how that manifested. Thirdly, as I began my research, the events of the COVID-19 pandemic began to unfold, and it seemed apt to change my methodology and bring the COVID-19 pandemic into the context of my research. And then from there, thinking about concerns and hopes for this new normal in terms of dance and community dance specifically, and thinking about what might have been lost, but also what might have been gained during the course of the pandemic. Okay, so to go through the kind of chronology of my research, so I viewed everything through a hermeneutic lens, as this focuses on the interrelation of meaningful human relationships and stems from multiple perspectives, which I thought was a very apt when discussing notions of community. From there, I outlined my 5 research questions. I conducted a literature review, which looked primarily at sociological theory. I then developed my research framework, which used storytelling as a key approach to not only try and foster a sense of community between individuals in workshops that I later ran, but also it is very pertinent to community as well. Next, I conducted some interviews with people who had a long-standing interest in dance. They took a narrative approach, and then I analysed them for recurrent themes. Then I conducted a practical element where I ran a series of online workshops using storytelling as a stimulus for movement. And I then analysed the impact and thought about whether a sense of community had been fostered throughout that process. I developed a piece called Communitas, which took the form of a live art installation with both live and digital contributions. And finally, I reflected on everything that I had learnt throughout this project, which spanned from January 2020 until October 2020. So these are the research questions that were explored. Firstly, how might individual dance experiences and memories inform notions of community? So that's where the interviews came in. Secondly, how might the sharing of dance experiences within a group of dancers be explored in an online setting? So that's where I developed these series of creative movement workshops with an intergenerational group. What kind of community was fostered through this approach? So that was me reflecting on those workshops. Next, how might a choreographer use these memories to create an intergenerational choreography? And what creative methods might be employed to manage these elements to form a coherent choreographic work? So firstly, the literature review, I'll just hone in on 2 questions that I addressed. So the first was defining the terms communitas and community and how these terms applied to my research. So I focused on Edith and Victor Turner, who were anthropologists, and they defined communitas as the sense felt by a group when their life together takes on full meaning. And it manifests when the group engage in a collective task with their full attention. It's an aspect of community that focuses on the social relationships and occurs when the social order is deconstructed and members are regarded to be equal. And this can lead individuals to enter a state of what we call liminality, or betwixt and between, where they recognize themselves in others and their sense of individuality is shedded. And another question that I addressed before outlining my methodology was, what are the underpinning characteristics of community dance practices? And I focused on Diane Ammons, who highlighted 5 key components. So it involves a focus on participation, collaborative relationships, inclusive practice, opportunities for positive experiences, and a celebration of diversity. So with this in mind, I aimed to develop workshops that upheld those values. Then I moved on to creating my research framework, and I developed this theoretical model to sort of express the ideas that I was going to cover in the research project. So memories, stories, and experiences, and alongside within the context of intergenerational group, and then reflecting on how this, what kind of notions of community arose from these elements. So to address the research question, how might individual dance experiences and memories inform notions of community, I conducted interviews with 12 participants from a variety of dance backgrounds based in the southeast of England. The interviews were fairly informal, ethnographic style, to try and encourage the participants to speak freely and take on the role of storyteller. I then transcribed the recordings verbatim and then used 3 levels of coding: open, focused, and narrative, to look for recurrent themes. And what came out of this analysis was 4 key themes. The first being micro, macro, and interwoven communities. So all participants identified as being part of the dance community, as well as identifying as being part of communities on a local, national, and international level, and within their local dance communities also being part of micro dance communities. All the accounts, first of all, emphasised to me the intricacy and somewhat intangibility of the term community. So I tried to demonstrate this diagrammatically, which you'll see on the next slide, as sort of concentric circles, with higher education, teaching dance, professional dance, community dance, them being united in kind of the online dance community, which since the COVID pandemic, that has grown substantially with a wealth of free online classes, and that would have heightened access to people who previously, due to geographical reasons or financial means, might not have previously been able to access that before. All of these smaller communities are surrounded by regional, national, and international dance communities. Okay, second theme that came through was communitas in action. So through these interviews, there seemed to be tangible demonstrations or expressions of communitas. So to quote a couple of the participants, one participant said, "When dancing, I feel a connection to something. It's so much more than this body. It's something so much bigger than me." And another participant said, "I feel part of a whole larger group. I guess existentially, it's a feeling that it's something bigger than myself." So both these parallel Victor Turner's ideas of liminality and the removal of social structures and feelings of equality within a group. The third theme that arose was communitas and somatic practices. So there seemed to be a clear relationship between experiences of communitas and styles of dance that were influenced by somatic practices. So somatic practices, that involves listening to the body and responding to the sensations through movement. So sensations driving a movement exploration. To quote one contemporary dance teacher, which most contemporary dance is founded on somatic practices, She said, "We're all connecting and moving around. People are respecting each other's space and everyone is creating this interaction. It feels like matter. It feels like energy." So that was the third emergent theme. And finally, the last theme that came through was anti-communitas environments. So those participants that I interviewed who had previously worked as professional dancers or currently were working or are still working as professional dancers, commented on the competitive nature of the dance industry and how that resulted in them feeling excluded from particular communities. And it seemed that competition runs counter to fostering any sense of community and excludes those feelings of equality. So this made me also think forward to the workshops that I'll be running to ensure that I would try and be mindful of not cultivating any dynamic that would promote competitiveness. So moving on to the next part. So the third part involved embodying stories. So this was running a series of workshops to address the research questions. How might the sharing of dance experiences within a group of dancers be explored in an online setting? And what kind of community is fostered through this approach? So you can see on the right, that's just a screenshot taken from one of the workshops in one of our movement improvisations. So there were 7 participants aged between 21 and 62 from different geographical locations. Had one girl from Greece, another person from Germany. It involves sharing stories of dance experiences and using them as inspiration for exploring new movement pathways. So for instance, I led them through a visualization of a beautiful landscape and encouraged them to explore that through movement and develop a gesture that would reinforce that feeling. And then we had a discussion together where we shared our experience of where we'd gone with that movement exploration, and then that was used as a stimulus for the following improvisation task. The workshop footage was analysed to consider the kind of community that was fostered through this approach. And 2 key themes that came out, that it appeared to be that a sort of socially deconstructed environment that the online setting lends itself to actually made people quite forthcoming and were willing to share quite intimate feelings and thoughts with the rest of the group. So that made me think that possibly an online setting lends itself to feelings of communitas. And secondly, that it was a temporary community. Even after the first session, there was quite a few people that commented on feeling a sense of community with others. Perhaps that was due to the openness of the group and the reason why they'd signed up in the first place, because they were open to this sort of experience, but it was something interesting that came out of that experience. Final thing to comment on, one member of the group, he commented on the fact that within an online setting, it feels almost, you do often feel a sense of a disconnection rather than a connection. And he talked about it seeming as if you were in an exhibition and you were observing other things, but not necessarily part of it. And that became a later theme in the live art installation, which I thought was something that was very interesting. Okay, so moving on to creating communitas. So this was a work that took place on the 14th of September 2020 after an intensive rehearsal period at the university in a large dance studio there. So this was addressing the research questions: how might a choreographer use these memories to create an intergenerational choreography, and what creative methods might be employed to manage these elements to form a coherent choreographic work. So what I did is I contacted participants of the research, both from the interviews and from the workshops, and asked them to make creative offerings after reflecting on the workshops and themes of community. I had to adjust my original artistic vision somewhat due to the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to make it a socially distanced piece, so limiting the audience numbers. But actually, I think it resulted in a work that was multifaceted because it involved both live and digital work. Okay, here is a floor plan that I developed alongside the dancers. And those rehearsals with 2 dancers took place between the 7th and 11th of September, and there were 6 performances with 5 audience members allowed into the space at one time. So there were 2 live dancers and 11 digital contributors, and we developed 3 key themes. So verbatim was in the first section of the piece that involved using the audio recordings as a soundtrack, and the dancers responded to those, the words and sentiments expressed from the interviewees. Frames that explored the idea of feeling constantly contained within a frame and feeling almost as if you're in a performance, but also the question of who's the observer. And then finally, digital duets, which involved the live dancers creating a complementary choreography in response to a video that was offered by various participants of the workshops. So audience members were free to move around the space, and they were encouraged to join in the dance in free movement for the final dance, in the hope of them possibly feeling communitas in that final stage as part of the piece itself. Here are some photos taken from the piece. So on the top left, that was showing a digital duet between a woman called Lisa, who took part in the workshops, and Bonnie, who's the dancer. So Bonnie created a solo in response to Lisa, but it almost appeared as if they were dancing together. The second photograph in the middle, that was the section called Frames, exploring ideas of disconnection and isolation. The third photo on the right, that was a digital contribution from a man called Julian, who developed a solo based on feelings of nostalgia and loneliness, and was responded by Mason, a professional dancer who's in the foreground. And the bottom two photographs are showcasing the beginning section of the piece, which involved using audio recordings and the dancers responding to those audio recordings through movement. So in terms of...
You just have 3 minutes left.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay.
I think I'm on time.
Fabulous.
So in terms of final reflections, it seemed that a greater sense of community is fostered when the underpinning values of inclusivity, participation and collaboration promoted in community dance practices are upheld. And this parallels Turner's notions of liminality and the shedding of social structures to have feelings of equality. Secondly, non-normative dance settings appear to encourage some individuals to be more forthcoming and to build connections with other participants, which makes me think that actually perhaps online dance groups provide a setting that naturally lends itself to fostering a sense of community, provided that the underpinning values of community dance are maintained. So in terms of offerings forward, I would say I'm very at the beginning of my career, having only graduated, well, not even graduated yet, having completed my studies in January. I'm looking to create a company called Communitas Dance and continue this idea of reflecting on communitas and community. So I'm running a few online creative workshops and beginning again to collate and curate a live art installation, which I hope will take place later this year. So thank you very much for listening. Here is my Instagram and website. I would love to hear from anyone who feels like collaborating. And thank you very much for listening.
You can go. All right, so this is a paper called Being Seen Unseen. And here I go. Demonstrations and protests require visibility. It is necessary that they are noticed and that their messages are brought into public awareness. And while visibility largely suggests the visual, I am here using the term descriptively to indicate awareness and attention more broadly. Visibility is also an unwanted element in protest. Individuals often do not want to be personally identified for any number of reasons. A double bind occurs here between desired and undesired visibility. Anonymity within a collective body offers a kind of protection for protesters, which in turn makes the sense of community within the protest body stronger. To become more visible as a collective, an amplification of presence is needed to garner spectatorial attention. As a collective body, they need spectators or audiences to whom they direct their political messages. They amplify, heighten, or dilate their presence largely through the use of staging and theatricality, or the movement into a realm of performance, unreality, and fictionalization. I will narrow in on Protest by Extinction Rebellion, that I'll call XR, as an example, and discuss first how they craft and induce visibility by shifting presence from the pedestrian into the spectatorial via theatricality. Second, I will discuss roles that technological mediation plays in spectatorial visibility during, but more crucially after the protest event, which I will refer to as a digital afterlife, as a virtual informational thing. To start, is it showing? Yep, there we go. To start, a bit of background on XR. XR is a non-centralized protest movement that campaigns for eco-focused planetary awareness and action. They have been conducting public protest demonstrations since 31 October 2018. Note that this is Halloween. In XR's own words, quote, 6,000 of us converged on London to peacefully block 5 major bridges across the Thames. We planted trees in the middle of Parliament Square and dug a hole there to bury a coffin representing our future. We superglued ourselves to the gates of Buckingham Palace as we read a letter to the Queen, end quote. As an introduction to this community, actions and acts of performative meaning emerge. Quoting them again, organize as small autonomous groups distributed around the world, a complex web that is constantly evolving as we grow and learn. We are working to build a movement that is participatory, decentralized, and inclusive, end quote. As such, the initial 6,000 participants had no control over potential contagion of their community or their message, and perhaps they never wanted that. In their own words, quote, actions generated huge national and international publicity, and as news spread, their ideas connected with tens of thousands of people around the world. The XR project was resonating with a deeply felt need for community and solidarity. XR themselves note how their community auto-reproduced and that such growth was contingent on huge national and international publicity and news, end quote. Far from a localized and contained community phenomenon, XR, its missions and messages transmitted through virtual, tele, and print media to become a global community within months. From that initial Halloween Day demonstration in London, XR's protest demonstrations, stunts, and performances have evolved and become both larger scale and more extensive. Now, one of their most recognizable elements is the extreme theatricality and disquieting affective impact of their demonstrations. Theatrical elements enhance and augment visibility. Indeed, these protests at times move past just elements and are street performance or live art on their own. Here you can see a CSI scene that they set up. Taking a simplified dictionary cue from Andrew Quick and Richard Rushton, quote, theatrical means of or relating to theater, exaggerated or affected, especially as such affectations might pertain to human behavior, end quote. By defining XR's elements as theatrical, I am noting how these protests both acknowledge and access their public context as highly charged and with the potential to veer into performance or fictionalization, and also as explicit performance that relegates their context into split spaces in which the protesters or protest objects become performers for a public audience. In a sense, the public space is treated like a theater, and in so doing becomes a space for turning, quote, performers into a fictionalized version of themselves, working through a process of abstraction of and alienation from the self. And for spectators, opening up the possibility of making a critical stance. Notably, theatrical implies the fictional for performers and critical stances for spectators or audiences. In the context of a protest, a very Brechtian notion is implied by this. Performers maintain a distanced, fictionalized reality, allowing spectators to observe, consider, critique, and judge inherent messages. Quoting them again, the real or imagined gaze under which the performance takes place thus creates a distinct virtual space belonging to the other, from which fiction can emerge, end quote. Theatrical elements or tactics then are used and employed to facilitate such fictionalization and critical distancing for spectators. Theatrical elements or tactics actually denote something very specific in terms of material and immaterial things here. An observational overview of recent XR protests gives a sense of what these are. First, much of the demonstrations follow standard protest formulae. They occupy a centralized location of a major city with large bodies of gathered people, mobilizing through spaces, streets, corridors of the city, chanting, singing, shouting, and otherwise making noise that attracts attention and can carry political messages, using signs, placards, and other written statements to broadcast political messages, often in pun form. Clothing and personal appearance of protesters adopts a tonality that fits with these political messages or works in concert with them. While some of this is already somewhat theatrical, the more heightened theatrical elements are evident in forms of costuming, the erection of large-scale object installation pieces or site-specific scenography, and the use of demonstrators as live performers. As examples, protesters often spray themselves with blood or wear black or lurid green cloaks. Here you see there is a die-in where protesters lay as though dead across expanses of space. Once they created this sprawling Holocaust summoning installation of grids of shoes with no human occupants. Recently, Trafalgar Square was splashed with blood red dye, while its fountains were dyed this green. And perhaps the most eye-catching and theatrical are the performances of what are called the Red Rebel Brigade, seen here. I'll unpack a few of these a bit more, but by initial observation, we can note how these theatrical and performative elements strongly evoke XR's occupation with, quote, humanity itself being on the brink of the abyss, our potential extinction. We face a breakdown of all life, the tragedy of tragedies, the unhallowed horror. Manifesting the existential abyss, breakdown, tragedy, and horror is achieved through this imagery of violence, blood, slaughter, human absence, toxicity, and spectral humanoid forms. Something that is at least partially fictional and unreal, or at minimum is something that is lifted from a different context. The impact is really hard to ignore, and these protests become possessed by such theatrical elements. XR intends for people, bystanders, populations, sympathetic coevols, to be disrupted from normal life, to look and in looking become an audience who contemplate, feel anxious, angry, afraid, or impassioned. And here you're looking at a scene from Canning Town Station where they disrupted life really badly and people had to drag them down off of the carriages. Unpacking some of the above-mentioned theatrical elements, the most superficial and pervasive theatrical element is the simple similarizing or even costuming of protesters. Physical similarization both heightens collective entitativity, that is, makes everyone feel and appear more cohesively contained like a singular entity. This also has the effect of reducing individuality and escalating anonymity, which is an oft-featured thing in civil disobedience and disruption, where policing legal or social fears might arise. Generally, individual demonstrators wear a lot of black or lurid green costumes, or white smocks, masks, gas masks, medical masks, radioactive respirator masks, high-vis jackets, or sometimes they even wear duct tape over their mouths. When looking at the collective protest bodies on the whole, the dress of the participants treads between normal clothing, uniforming, and costuming. Andy Lavender elaborates that, quote, with the uniform, there's no separation of person and pose. With the costume, however, the wearer always appears in addition to the persona that they present. And costume is donned to present the appearance of another reference at the moment that the individual body inhabits public space to take a stand, end quote. Meaning that when the line between clothing and costume, or clothing and uniform is crossed into costume, the wearer is no longer just themselves. They also now bring to public presence another reference, such as a statement or a character. XR protesters show all three types of dress. There is normal clothing, and many people join the protests appearing just as themselves. Many protesters, either intentionally or by chance, also wear a type of uniform, conforming to the color palette or wearing XR branded clothing. Like that. Oh, wait. Sorry. Like that. For many, this is as simple as wearing the XR insignia. You can see it on the bottom there, a large encircled X that is connected at top or bottom to form an hourglass. Costuming, on the other hand, is very noticeable and being adopted to and used to create presence of these other references. Many people becoming visions of citizens of dystopian futures ripped from The Walking Dead, Mad Max, or Children of Men. Notable recurring costumes are references to such a world in which we cannot breathe the air and require masks and tanks of oxygen to survive. And in the COVID era, this is heightened with the non-stop presence of all masks. They often also wear long trench coats, sometimes splashed with blood, or don large amounts of high vis, suggesting alert, caution, danger. Secondly, messaging is enhanced via props, flags, signs, placards, and banners of all sorts. These make optic messages that cannot otherwise be heard. The cacophony of sound and noise at these events creates an audioscape in which heard messages pop into and out of focus chaotically. Visual messages populate these demonstrations without fail, as they can easily be seen and absorbed from a distance. They also can incorporate irony, double entendre, or wordplay that is harder to convey verbally sometimes. Furthermore, they can replicate a message through photographic means very easily. The digital reproduction and documentation of these protests, photographs in the documentation, photographs are easier to circulate and reproduce than audio or video. Silence is also used here and there. This action works to remove expected soundscapes of protest and instead instigate a silence that suggests absence, which is not really a true silence because there's ambient sound. But Ross Brown writes about, quote, a feeling of power in being part of a noisy crowd, and an electricity, a potential power, in being part of a resolutely silent one. The evocation of silence in mass gatherings is a focusing power more than anything. Brown states that, quote, they are rhetorical rallying devices, both affective in that they are stirring, and effective in that they harness and focus crowd behavior away from unruliness, end quote. In one way, this is powerful in that its method of commanding attention creates a quiet focus, an active attention. In another way, it creates the sense of the absence of human agency, like the shoe installation. Following Mark Fisher, encountering absence of agency where it is otherwise expected constitutes, quote, a particular kind of aesthetic experience, end quote, which is what we call eeriness. While I suspect XR is not directly applying Fisher's thinking, they are drawing on a long tradition of using an absence where presence is expected to create a strong experience of eeriness, crafting and orchestrating the affective space. This use of placards, signs, and banners is like the theatrical conventions of Brecht and Boal, in which agitated propaganda becomes a central type of semiotics. Their own use of agitprop is an adoption of such practices from the political and social propaganda machines. There's a circularity of application here between the social and the theatrical. XR is using agitprop approaches to blowhorn their messages to audiences, but in their manifestations, they are also adopting these theatrical tropes and forms from people such as Brecht and Boal. The XR community is no longer tethered to the physical body of the protest collective in the event time. Now any protest or demonstration is instigated with foreknowledge of an intention for their visibility extending into mediatized spaces after the event. Through digitized media, such communities exist beyond their material gatherings, attaining a virtual community in a sort of technologically mediated digital afterlife. The heightened visibility offered by theatricality gives greater gravitational pull on attention in such digital reproduction. The greater the theatricality, the greater the public drive to watch, but also the more interesting and eye-catching the photographs and video and so on, as I'm sure you can see as you've been looking at these. Their messages become hyper-articulated and optically charged, ready for representation in photography, video, and audio that can echo through media channels. In becoming represented as media, they instantiate post-event echoes and reanimation. A continuity of the community thus moves beyond the temporal material body of the group present in the demonstration event. The community transubstantiates into a virtual and immortal form on the internet. Media clients then can interact with the community by viewing, commenting, downloading, manipulating, repurposing, and uploading artifacts of the community in any number of ways for any number of reasons. Itself a form of community, social media outlets in particular revivify demonstrations and activate an audience who can engage with this virtual afterlife, reposting, commenting, editing, or re-editing media material into new forms and posting them forward. In becoming a virtual entity, these communities grow beyond human scalar understanding entirely. It is not possible to track or quantify the user consumption of or engagement with XR's digital afterlife or any protest group. Equally, the contagion of visibility moves rapidly through the expanses of space, traversing the globe, and also across time. Old demonstrations are now new in the sense that they recur online whenever they are linked or found, and the community visibility will extend into the future as long as servers maintain the host media outlets. I argue that this makes them a type of hyper-object. Timothy Morton outlines how these kinds of things are so, quote, massively distributed in time and space relative to humans, end quote, as to exceed prior semantics, and he invents the term hyper-objects for them. Incidentally, he first invented the term to categorize global warming. Morton elucidates how hyperobjects represent real objective material things, but as they exist on levels of impact and quantity at their utmost extreme. The XR community is extended both in real material event space and in non-material digital environments, I argue makes them a hyperobject. One could say that the digital is not actual material or physical, but rather informational. But the information contained in that digital afterlife codes to media material. If the global medical nightmare through which we are all living right now has shown us anything, it is that we are now in a phase of existence where we have accepted and redefined the digital and online as reality, and we engage with and through it as though it is so. As a concluding thought, I return to the complexity of visibility of communities. I titled this Being Seen, Unseen to play upon the variety of visibilities at work here. There is first concern of perceptual and attentive visibility that is sought after in public demonstration. As noted, attention is needed to communicate demonstration intentions. Being seen is often made easier or amplified to become the sole focus of attention through the creation of a scene by theatricalizing. There is also the, at times, need to be unseen as an individual in these communities to protect oneself against social and legal threats, thus a retreat into anonymity within a masked collective identity. Via technical and digital mediation, such community visibility, life, message, and impact extends through time and space. And as the example of XR has shown, this can occur with exponential growth and spread. As a final point, the re-examination of a community like XR and its messaging as a hyper-object highlights how digital afterlives for much of the observing or spectating public is not an afterlife at all, but a present life. Most people do not or cannot attend the demonstrations, or indeed all of them. But via these post-event digital echoes, they can encounter the scenography of the demonstrating body, experience their presence and theatricalized impact, much as we are doing right now. And that's me, done.
Wonderful. My gosh, bang on 20 minutes as well, Andrew. I got caught up, so I didn't give you a warning. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I had a timer going for myself, so I was all right.
Oh, well done, that person. Wonderful. If you can stop, wonderful. Stop sharing your screen. That is fabulous. Thank you so much, Andrew. We'll take.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Benedictus, first year PhD student at Queen's, cultural studies student actually. I'm a performer, choreographer. Actually, this is my first time trying to do a paper presentation. Most often I do performing and choreographic presentations for conferences. So I'm just trying to try give it a shot here. So I'm going to present on Instagram, bringing you closer to the things you love. Ghanaian popular dance circulation through interaction within pervasive media. So sorry, I have two screens here, so I'm going to be flitting from one screen to the other. Hopefully it works. So I'm saying today nations and people are increasingly connected and mutually dependent on each other through international trade, finance, culture, tourism, etc. And this is actually fostered by online media. Now, as it must be expected, cultural practices such as dance and other artistic products are being affected. So in this presentation, actually going to analyze or look at two famous Ghanaian dances and what I call cipher pages to highlight how Instagram has given Ghanaian dancers opportunity to reach out to wider audience community. All right. How do I go to the next slide here? All right, yeah, that's it. So just a brief information about Ghana. So Ghana is a West African country, formerly Gold Coast, a former British colony, gained independence somewhere around 1957. Some 30 million people. It's actually a youthful population, so yeah, they are still growing. Capital is Accra. They speak English as an official language, even though we have over 70 ethnic groups. So that's just a brief information about Ghana. So dance in Ghana is very significant, and it reflects and carries the cultural identity of the people. It is holistic and incorporates other art forms, especially music. Now, dance serves as an index to the values and structures that enable the community to express and interpret the various events of life. Now, in Ghana, the youth are relegated to the margins by the adults and the elite. Therefore, as a form of counter-public entertainment, identity construction, and a means to negotiate poor economic conditions in popular arts, mostly music and dance. Now, these popular dances are actually what I'm focusing on in this presentation. And Terry Bright-Ofosu, in his much recent doctoral thesis, described Ghanaian popular dances as a very low-cost, dynamic, and processual form of cultural movement production. It's mostly produced by the marginalized, as I mentioned earlier, for the entertainment and counter-public, mostly performed in tandem with popular music in street corners, bars, nightclubs, and is birthed locally through syncretic global and local interactions. Now, Ofosu again identifies 5 different categories of popular dances in Ghana. And he has Latino, Francophone, Western dances, and what he calls high life dance and locally created popular dances. Now, my attention is on the locally created popular dances, specifically the Azonto dance. I'm sure you've heard of Azonto. If you've not heard of Azonto, Azonto is from one of the deprived areas in Ghana called Accra. Now, Accra, Jamestown, Bukom, Nima, and Choko. I'm not sure you're familiar with these names anyway. Now, Azonto is influenced by traditional Ghanaian dances and some previous Ghanaian popular dances. Now, he also has influences coming from neighboring countries, especially Nigeria. Now, the Azonto term was actually coined by folks in the Hausa community. And the phrase actually is Azo Intaba, which means come and let me touch. Now, this is a symbolic representation of something that is easily touchable or something that is cheap. So Azonto implies a cheap, low-life person or cheap, low-life girl. So fast forward, Azonto became or was actually used to describe cheap, low-life person, cheap, low-life music or dance. Now, Azonto started as a basic dance movement, very basic dance movement. And now Azonto has grown and subsumes all newly created Ghanaian popular dances. So Azonto is no more just a dance movement. It is a dance form or a dance genre. So if I can play a short video here to just a couple of movements in the Azonto dance. Is my sound live? Yeah. So these are just a couple of dance movements in the Azonto dance genre. So Azonto until now was performed in dance centers and community squares, as I mentioned earlier. But then recently, the youth has found social media as an alternative venue to exhibit their talents. Now, as a dance form that has been created and performed by marginalized youth in deprived areas, I'm asking how the Azonto has been able to travel easily across the globe, even though it's difficult to acquire foreign visas in Ghana. Now, what has been the role of the global media, especially Instagram, in the global circulation of Ghanaian popular dances, the Azonto? And how have dancers employed Instagram? How do I stop this? Yeah. There you go. All right. So the whole idea of global media flows and how media is coming in media is getting into the global south, and in this case, Africa, Ghana, has been fiercely contested. Now you have the optimists and the skeptics. Who the optimists are actually enthused that global media is the panacea to the world's problems, while the skeptics are saying it's another form of Western hegemony, promoting another form of colonization, promoting the rise of monoculturalization and all that. But then there are others who are actually in the middle, saying it promotes, it simultaneously creates wealth and poverty at the same time. So it creates division between haves and have-nots at the same time. Now I'm subscribing to this in-between position. So therefore, I'm basing my presentation on Ohiago's premise that whilst technology has the potential of eroding local cultures, they equally provide a podium for global societies and cultures to meet and interact. So in this case, we are not only, so the way forward in this case is not to focus on only the negatives of media coming in Africa, but rather concentrating on the potentials that it can make African culture visible to the world. So in this end, I'm going to look at the two famous Ghanaian dancers and how they utilize Instagram. All right, so before I actually delve into these dancers, just a quick overview of what Instagram offers these dancers. Now, Instagram gives users the opportunity to post pictures and videos. As we all know, they employ tagging, mentioning, or at mentions various hashtags. Now, hashtags serve as metadata to help dancers locate and discover content about specific dances or specific topics that they are interested in. And for dancers on Instagram, most often these hashtags come in the form of dance challenges, or what I call the ciphers on the social media. Now, the hashtag dance challenge come up mostly when there are new dance moves, new popular dance music, or any social, political, or economic issue that is of interest. Now, my argument here is that these short dances do not only become avenue for the youth to exhibit their dances, but also another way for creating worldwide visibility for the Azonto dances. Now, Instagram's affordances of persistence, visibility, replicability, searchability, as theorized by Dana Boyd in 2014, gives it the ability to easily spread and mutate content across borders. And through the concept of context collapse, audiences from diverse backgrounds and nationalities within the shared network society get exposed to these dances, and therefore bringing us closer to the things that we love, as per Instagram's slogan. Now, my first dancer that I'm looking at is Dance God Lloyd, or short Dance God. Now, Dance God is a professional dancer and choreographer, and also a dance coach. He mostly posts videos of himself dancing as a solo performer with his crew, although sometimes he has videos of performances of a group choreography. Now, most often, Ghanaian pop dancers only get featured on mainstream media when notable musicians employ them in their music videos. So, because these mainstream media is elite controlled. Now, as a result, Dance God and his colleagues resorted to posting short videos on Instagram as a way of building a brand for themselves. Now, gradually, Dance God has become a household name in Ghanaian popular dance circles. Now, as he puts his as he summarizes how he uses Instagram, he says, "Social media has been the main tool to showcase my art. I don't have to pay a dime. I just record a video, put it out there, and that is all. Now, Dance God also uses hashtags or hashtag challenges. Recently, he has this hashtag that's on your screens now. Hashtag Dance God, hashtag already, hashtag Demagono. These are various hashtags that he uses. Now, recently, he used hashtag already for one of Beyonce's music, and that got him the opportunity to get featured in Beyonce's Black Skin music video in 2000 and is it last year? Yeah, I think last year. Yeah, that was last year. Now, Dance God Lloyd gradually has become an ambassador for the Azonto and was included in the most influential youth in Ghana for the year 2019. He's also actually the first Ghanaian popular dance to garner 1 million followers on Instagram. So this is Dance God and his crew in Beyonce's already music video. Now my next dancer is another one called Incredible Ziggy. Now Ziggy is a choreographer just like Dance God. He has almost, as per when I put this slides together, he had over 500,000 followers, both Ghanaians and non-Ghanaians. Now he has been cited as one of the first Ghanaian dancers to start posting short videos on Instagram. Now, in an interview with BBC Pidgin, Ziggy acknowledges Instagram and social media as a contributing factor to his success, advancing him from a dancer on the street of Accra to an international choreographer traveling around the world. Now, when asked how he uses Instagram to promote his craft, he says, and in Pidgin, he says, social media come, start the post 1 minute videos and put the caption, please tag your friends. It means social media came and then he started posting 1 minute videos with the caption, please tag your friends. Now Ziggy is also noted for creating new dance moves and dance challenges, just like Dance God Lloyd. Now, quite recently, he created the Pilolo and Coupe dance moves and employed the same tagging and hashtag technique to make the dance spread to the extent that even Janet Jackson performed these dance moves in one of her Made for Now performances. Now, aside these two dancers that I'm talking about, there's this other community pages on Instagram that operate as pseudo promoters that are mostly described as influencers. Now, I argue that both Dance God and Incredible Ziggy can be described as influencers as they are now. So therefore, to put a clear distinction between the two influencers, I am proposing to describe the community pages as cipher pages. Now, within the Ghanaian popular dance parlance or within Ghanaian popular dance circles, the cipher is a common space that allows individuals to express themselves creatively in a form of dance. So in a way of expanding and repurposing the term in order to align it to the practices of these online pages, I describe these community pages as cipher pages. So a cipher page, therefore, is an Instagram community page that serves as platforms for dancers to showcase their arts. They may not necessarily have more followers than the likes of Dance God and Incredible Ziggy, but they showcase these arts to the outside world as an outside Ghana. Now, in this case, I'm looking at the likes of Chop Daily in UK, Afro Daily. I'm still investigating where exactly Afro Daily is coming from. Afro Nation, Afro Bees, and in France. Now, these are mostly manned by or operated by Africans or Ghanaians in the diaspora. Right? In the diaspora. Now, it's not too clear the standard required for one's video to be featured, but then dancers mostly need to mention these pages in their post. They tag them or use specific hashtags to have their videos featured. Now, operators of cipher pages, with the help of other dancers, come up with various dance challenges that set the cipher in motion. Now, participants of these challenges stand a chance of being promoted to the wider audience. The cipher pages attain more visibility, and Azonto finds another way of moving outside its community of origin. Now, how sorry, I didn't show the cipher pages here. This is Afrobeats and Chop Daily. Now, Chop Daily featuring Dance God Lloyd in one of their posts. Now, how does this whole thing work? To make sense of how they are zoned to circulate easily, I am trying to evoke Halif Osmari's Connective Marginality and Alex Halleck's 2014 Active and Affective Viewing. Now, one key popular music or dance disseminated on the stream is, of course, hip hop. Now, Halifu in 2007 came up with connective marginalities as a framework to discuss how youth across the globe who might not even speak English, accept, decode, and indigenize hip hop. Now, according to Halifu, youth across the globe are connected by 4 main configurations. That is, being a youth, historical oppression, class, and culture. Now, these four resonances unify hip hop culture across borders, as marginalized youth around the globe recognize a strong similarity between their social situations to that of African Americans engaged in the hip hop culture. Now, similarly, Alex Halleck in 2014, investigating how popular dance on screen travels across borders, came up with affective and active engagement. Now, affective engagement is viewing that is engaged through a feeling of recognition, desire, or belonging whilst watching. Now, the emotional attachment derived from viewing of these dances on Instagram creates a sense of belonging to the dances and dancers community of origin. Now, active viewing, on the other hand, promotes actions such as learning, adapting the dances, and recreating these dances. Now, active viewing, therefore, fuels the dissemination process and makes new communities of practice possible. Now, active viewing in this case encourages the global ubiquity of dances, as new members may learn the dances from Instagram. Now, I'm arguing that connective marginalities and active viewing processes are intricately, they are in conversation, actually. Let me put it that way. Now, relating this to Ghanaian popular dances, I say audiences on Instagram come from diverse backgrounds and contexts, and hence dancers' main aim is to connect with the unknown audiences through their known followers, as clearly seen in Ziggy's caption, please tag your friends. Now, these friends that are supposed to be tagged could be dancers or non-dancers, Ghanaians or non-Ghanaians, all of whom will tend to engage with these videos in different ways. Now, popular dancers within Ghanaian context will view these dances as performances that celebrate their marginalities and hence will effectively engage with the videos. Now, viewers who engage effectively with these dance videos make the emerging community of popular dance visible. Now, when Dance God and his colleagues post these videos, the marginalized in Ghana and around or across the globe identify these performances based on Osmari's concept of connective marginalities. Now, those who find themselves wanting to dance like Dance God and Incredible Ziggy will go an extra mile of actively engaging with these videos and then posting remakes and doing their own versions of these dance videos, and hence increasing the spreadability of that Zonto and expanding the emerging community. Now, the unknown audience, or those who want to be, or those who come from a more neutral background, who have no connections or who do not fit within Halifu's connective marginality, let me say, they might come from elitist background or might not have any history of oppression. For some, it might be just a way to escape the elitist art form and join in quotes these marginalized performances.
Benedictus,
Now,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
You've got about a minute left. So
All right.
Start wrapping up.
I'm
Thank
almost done
you.
here. I'm on my
Minute
last
left.
slide.
Minute
Yeah.
left.
So where was I? Now what I'm trying to say is, now these people who coming from the neutral background learn what De France is calling the commodified habitus. These are just principles. These are just the visual features of these dances, and then making the what's the name? Creating new communities of practice around. Now, in conclusion, what I just did here is to interrogate how Azonto are circulated across borders via Instagram. Now, I've argued here that through active and effective viewing of these dances, audience from diverse backgrounds engage with popular dances and end up making the imagined community of pop dance visible whilst creating communities of practice around the world. Now, one thing that is worth noting is that these activities online is what has encouraged the emergence of what we call the Afrobeat, Afropop, or Afro dance that has taken on the world now. And Azonto has played a very significant role in this emergence of Afro dance.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, and thank you to the organisers for this opportunity to share our work. I am Natasha Richards.
And I'm Iona Kilroy.
And we are Flow and Flux.
Flow and Flux is a discussion group which works to build a feminist community. Held once a month, each session explores a different theme through participatory exercises, ranging from theatre to creative writing to crafting.
We engage with feminist consciousness raising practices, sharing personal experiences in order to reflect on structural power within society and explore where feminist hope lies.
We are co-intellectual researchers and the co-directors of Flow and Flux. We met through the Consortium for Humanities and Arts South East England, known throughout as CHASE, which is our doctoral training partner.
My research involves using creative workshops and performances for relationships and sex education, mostly with secondary school aged young people.
While my research involves using live and embodied performance modes to explore the pressures of performing the self on Instagram amongst young women.
After both becoming committee members of the Chase Feminist Network, we decided to utilise our research and artistic experiences to further build feminist community. The seeds of Flow and Flux were planted.
Though we were practicing feminism in our daily lives, there was a sense of loneliness to our feminism. We longed for a space where we could nurture a more robust collective, where we could meet new and old friends, to connect, discuss, create, perform, and craft our way through issues impacting women and non-binary people.
Since Flow and Flux began with the support of the Chase Feminist Network, many of the aims align with the network aims. These include creating spaces and resources for discussion and networking, challenging inequalities, providing personal support, valuing the personal, political, and creative alongside the academic, and finally, placing a strong emphasis on intersectionality and interdisciplinarity.
We began sessions in November 2019. We originally opted for in-person workshops due to our mutual backgrounds in workshop facilitation. As theatre facilitators, we have both been influenced by feminist approaches to embodiment to address how material and ideological structures choreograph bodies, their movement, and how they signify. We felt passionate about integrating live and embodied performance exploration in Flow and Flux sessions to explore alternative ways to activate participants that would disrupt existing systems of representation, hierarchies, and ideologies.
Another factor we considered was that while social media provides opportunities for community building and activism, these platforms remain highly individualized. They are spaces in which the users are cajoled to carefully construct and perform the individualized self. This underlined the urgency to facilitate meetings where people could meet in person to grapple with issues collectively in creative and embodied ways that would allow them to observe differences and to find connections. In the slide, you can see an image from a participatory exercise whereby the string represents all of the different connections between participants.
However, March 2020 was intense. Like many others, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were left thinking, what do we do now? So much of our lives had abruptly come to a halt. Once again, we were alone in our feminism. Lockdown left us feeling isolated from any sense of feminist connection. For these reasons, it felt more important than ever to continue with Flow and Flux.
So, Flow and Flux pivoted online. In this presentation, we aim to share this transition. we'll discuss the challenges faced and the unexpected positives that occurred. In particular, we want to share how new modes of inhabiting space and creative exploration have allowed for real connections to be fostered in the digital realm.
One of the biggest challenges to overcome was the change in space. The pictures on the left of the slide shows our in-person setup. By chance, the room that we were assigned for Flow and Flux had a living room feel with a big, grand fireplace, as you can see here on the slide. This helped us to create the relaxed atmosphere we sought out. Ahead of sessions, we lay out vegan snacks, drinks, and craft materials. There were tables where the crafting or creative writing would take place, and an open space for performance work. We dotted blankets around the room for a cozy feel. We worried about our loss of the sense of atmosphere and connection when making the transition to the digital realm.
The image on the right highlights how we tried to recreate this space in our own home. We hope that by role modeling the comfort in our individual spaces, it would empower participants to do the same. We also urge them to get comfy through welcome emails and Eventbrite information. And it seemed to work. One by one, our participants appeared, sat comfortably on beds or sofas or at their desks, with snacks, a glass of wine, or a mug of tea in hand. Initial chatter often involved people sharing what they were drinking. As we were no longer providing these refreshments, people's choices inherently fostered connection and intimacy. As we got to know each other's drink choices or who was doing dry January.
Our digital community has allowed connections to reach further across the globe than we had originally imagined, with community members tuning in from Australia and the USA. Pre-COVID, our members were largely based in and around London. We now have members attending from all over the UK. Some women have been impacted unequally by unpaid care work during the pandemic, so online access has potentially been liberating for forming connections.
Each Flow and Flux session explores a specific theme. On the slide, you can see a selection of themes we have explored over the past 18 months. We approach topics from an intersectional perspective, ensuring the materials we set as stimuli demonstrate a range of perspectives from different ethnic, social, and sexual backgrounds. Sometimes the chosen topic has been suggested by the participants. Other times it is an area of interest held by ourselves or a response to current events.
Our June 2020 was feminism. I'm not sure, Tasha, maybe you can go on mute when I talk. The feedback's quite bad. Sorry about that. Our June 2020 session was planned to be on pornography and feminism. However, the urgency to reorient this session became stark due to the tragic murder of George Floyd. This prompted a Flow and Flux session on white privilege. This was one of the occasions where Flow and Flux has acted as a rehearsal space for everyday life. Creative exercises provided avenues to let out pent-up emotions and practice tough conversations ahead of time. For instance, we drew from the work of anti-racist poets, activists, and writers to influence creative writing and roleplay, exploring the best strategies to help with talking to family and friends about racism.
One of the most positive outcomes of this session was that 2 members of our community set up their own anti-racist discussion groups amongst peers. These groups utilised the exercises they had encountered in Flow and Flux to approach the necessary anti-racist work and champion Black creatives, writers, and activists. Other participants said they felt more equipped to challenge businesses and talk with family members.
We have a quote from a participant who has been a regular member of Flow and Flux, both in person and online. They say, "The opportunity to discuss current events and maintain a strong connection with other participants has been invaluable over the past year and has given me a much needed outlet for creativity and discussion. The conversations we've had and activities we've completed have helped to further my own sense of empathy during a difficult time for the world, and I've always left with a renewed sense of determination and optimism."
We would now like to talk you through our approach to the planning and delivery of our online sessions. Each session follows a similar format. In this presentation, we focus on our most recent session on feminism and mental health. We highlight how creative exploration can foster connection in the digital realm.
At the start, we go through the Zoom etiquette, which you can see on the screen now. Even though, for the most part, regular community members attend sessions, it is important to review expectations as it helps to reinforce the boundaries of the online space. The Zoom etiquette has evolved over time. We recently added share the space, as some community members had become very confident when sharing, so we implemented the ground rule as a reminder to make room for everyone in discussions.
It was important to us that Flow and Flux created a space where people can make and learn from mistakes. In the Zoom etiquette, we emphasise that participants should challenge ideas, not people. Thereby, we aim to cultivate a space where problematic views are questioned, but participants do not feel personally attacked if their ideas are challenged.
We feel that an extremely important device implemented in our sessions is what we describe as the check-in. Sometimes we use it more generally to share our current life circumstances in a creative way. For example, we share our mood as a weather report or our week as a news headline. Other times, we use the check-in to provide a platform for participants to begin exploring their personal responses to the session's theme.
Everyone takes a turn, which means it is a great way to ward off any initial nerves and to value all voices. Everyone gets a chance to unmute, take up space, to be heard and seen if they want to. For our session on mental health, we ask participants to describe a conversation you remember regarding mental health and how you felt hearing, speaking, watching it. Here is a response from one of our participants.
The sound, we can't hear the sound.
Oh, I'm not sure how to solve it, sorry. It's showing a different way my end and I can't see the hopping anymore.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's a shame. Just to explain the video then, the participant talks about how when they went to someone about their mental health, a professional, they didn't receive any of the support that they thought that they should, and they were able to share it with us in this moment and able to tell the other participants how that felt.
After the check-in, we usually include a creative writing exercise. We use creative writing as another way to unlock artistic expression. After completing the exercise, we give participants the option to share either a portion of their writing or to elaborate on how the process felt. This widens the scope of how participants can share their experience of engaging with the creative exercises.
In this workshop, the participants were asked to write crazy at the top of their page. They were given 5 prompts. For each prompt, they would respond with a 1 minute of continuous writing. The prompts worked through the senses, asking how crazy smelt, tasted, looked. On the slide, you can see a quote from a participant discussing her experience of the exercise. She said, "Oh God, my heart's still going. And like when you ask me how it smells and how it sounds, honestly, this really brought it back. It's actually been quite therapeutic."
To stimulate discussion, we usually select complex text. Sometimes it is academic text, other times not, but we always include a mixture of video or music to aid all learning styles. We share the material ahead of the meeting. This gives the participants a chance to familiarise themselves with the topic. However, to make the session as accessible as possible, we emphasise that participants are still welcome, even if they haven't engaged with the material beforehand.
In our last session, we shared a video clip from the recent Oprah interview with Meghan Markle, which is shown on the slide. The clip also included the reaction to the clip from the presenters on Good Morning Britain. The interview and the reaction were discussed at length over social media. In flow and flux fashion, we provided a space for participants to discuss their own responses, as well as how the reactions of social media related to wider feminist discussions around the support available for mental health.
When we consider how to utilise Zoom tools to foster connection within the exercises. Here on the screen, you can see an excerpt from the chat box where participants were asked to share what active tasks they undertake to support their mental well-being. Utilising the chat box allowed connections to form between participants that may find it difficult to unmute and speak. An unexpected outcome we found during the online sessions was that Zoom also allowed for many unplanned moments of connection. For instance, the use of Zoom emojis, from the thumbs up to the red heart emoji, provide lovely ways to show agreement or support to one another.
At the midpoint of our sessions, we have a 10-minute break. During the in-person sessions, we wouldn't always have a set break, since participants were free to grab extra food or drink during the discussions. In the digital realm, we considered Zoom fatigue, with many of our participants spending all day on the computer ahead of flow and flux. To maintain the connection during exercises, we offer an opportunity to disconnect. Unexpectedly, the outcome was that during the break, connections formed in different ways. Participants shared resources on the topic, enabling learning and connection to continue outside of the planned exercises. One participant has shared with us that they find it gives them a chance to digest and reflect on what we have done in the first part of the session and bring fresh ideas to the second part.
Like performance practitioners, we imagined our greatest challenge would be transferring performance-based exercises to the world of Zoom. However, the performance exercises have been a particularly joyful part of Flow and Flux online sessions, bringing light and energy. They've ranged from written monologues to choreographed group movement sequences. We've even had a few surprise entrances, which have been quite funny. We utilise the breakout rooms on Zoom to allow participants to co-create in smaller groups. Afterwards, we come together as a whole, and depending on what they feel comfortable sharing, we either watch performance work or hear about how they found the process.
In our session on feminism and mental health, the participants were asked to create a conversation between two characters that include the 5 ways to mental well-being, championed by the mental health charity Mind. These include being active, learning, taking notice, giving, and connecting with others. We're now going to share one of the clips from the performances. Obviously, with our technical issues, we won't be able to. But what it involves is one of our participants who is usually more reserved when it comes to the dramatic exercises. And this was her first time performing. This member has been coming for over a year. So this was a breakthrough moment for us, showing that confidence in the community can be built and nurtured over time.
For this short presentation, we've chosen to focus primarily on our incorporation of creative methods in our last workshop. However, we believe in providing multi-points of entry for creativity and ensure that Flow and Flux mixes it up month by month. As you can see on the slide here, this has ranged from sculpting Play-Doh vulvas to zine making and collages with household items, which you can see there on the bottom right.
We have found along the way that the incorporation of the participants' household items has been a potent way to share stories and memories, facilitating intense moments of connection amongst participants. This is something we wouldn't have been able to explore in person.
One interesting quality of the community is that it's rare that a participant has their camera off during our sessions. This isn't something that we have enforced, but something that has occurred organically. In our own experience of teaching and attending online events, where we are often met with endless black boxes, this feels like a success story. When new people join our sessions, they often start with their camera off. Within minutes, they realise that everyone else is visible and they follow suit. One new member shared with us that as a new PhD student, they were attending lots of online events, and because everybody had their screens off, they were feeling this intense lack of connection. They were extremely appreciative of inhibiting an online space where everyone was visible. We believe that cultivating a space where people feel safe to turn their cameras on has been a huge factor in building connection and camaraderie amongst participants.
In the current neoliberal landscape, where the self is a project to be managed in the pursuit of individual success, Flow and Flux champions the importance of spaces where people can come together to connect, to make discoveries and mistakes through creative exploration. While originally we privileged live and embodied practices, in this paper we have demonstrated how we maintained our ethos in the digital realm and the unexpected positives that occurred when Flow and Flux transitioned online. Despite the dominance of individualization in the digital realm, we have highlighted how new modes of inhabiting space and creative exploration have allowed for real connections to be fostered in that digital realm.
Thank you for listening to us today. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and answering any questions you have about Flow and Flux.
Please follow us on Twitter for updates about the Flow and Flux sessions. You can also join the mailing list by emailing us. We'll make sure to put that address in the chat.
Thank you so much, everyone, for presenting. Thank you for contributing. So I've got, these are sort of in order of presentation almost. So Andrew, just in terms of performance, do you think that the performative element of protests that you were talking about is really at risk of becoming much more important than the protest itself now that we're in such sort of media-driven times?
I do. I actually, in sort of researching what I wrote, there were a number of journalists who complained about that very factor and how Extinction Rebellion in particular, it begins to look like a pantomime, and it almost trivializes what is a large and very important issue. So yeah, I do think that as it becomes more theatrical, it can sway into becoming almost like nonsense. And if the theatrical, even if it doesn't sway into that, if the performative elements of it sort of become too heightened, I think the message gets lost sometimes. And that's, I don't know how XR would say, but I would think that that would be ineffective or counterproductive. So I think that can happen, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you start getting into the idea of the performative and just the idea of protest as visual, not excess, but visual element accompanying protest.
And in a larger version of that paper, I contrast XR's protests with the Hong Kong protests, which also utilize a lot of theatrical elements, but how they have different different outcomes that occur.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So I'll go to Anna, who was going to be first, but then went second. Darn computers. There's a couple of questions, but I suppose that the one I'm most interested in, essentially, is the idea that the system you were working with professionals and people who were amateur, did this make more of a link between the professional and non-professional? You had someone making their own piece and then a professional dancer sort of reacting to the piece. Do you think that made that conversation a little easier, a little more open? Your mic's off, Anna. That's okay. Maybe if I come back to you, maybe the mic will spring to life, Messiah-like. Benedictus, there was a question for you as well. Just and again, you may not have a feeling about this, or you may. Do you have a feeling about how dancers feel about traditional moves being used by other dancers? So those traditional dance techniques maybe being taken by someone not from that tradition and kind of moved forwards?
All right, yeah, thank you. Well, within the popular dance circles, it's not really, we don't really adhere to canons like you within the Western art or within the traditional circle. So it is free. We tap in from traditional dances, we tap in from other influences. So using traditional dance moves as popular dances is actually the norm.
That's
it's not really restricted. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting, because I was wondering how dancers feel about, some really traditional dance moves that maybe have been passed generationally and traditionally being then kind of popping up in a say a Beyonce video or something else, or actually being used by someone who actually maybe isn't from that tradition.
Okay, so if it's for the popular dances, we tweak traditional dances a bit for it to fit within our circles. But then if it's a traditional dance, if you tag it as a traditional dance, then we have to see what you are trying to say as traditional dances. Traditional dances have set aesthetics, set African principles, set whatever that we follow. But then for popular dances, because it's a youth culture, we just pick inspirations from them. So you see bits and pieces.
Okay.
And not the actual thing.
No, that's really interesting. I wondered what the connection between like the traditional, because I know there's a really big tradition of dance within Ghana, and how that moved forward to being kind of elementalized and taken forward by a new group of dancers, the youth dancers. That's really interesting. So I'll go to Flux and Flow, and because Anna's having to type away because the computer just hates her today, so she can't unmute herself. But to Flux and Flow, just with an idea of how the digital space allowed people to communicate. Were you genuinely surprised by how open people were kind of being in this digital space, as opposed to how you'd thought of this group kind of functioning as an in-person locus?
Yeah, I guess we could both answer. I'll talk first of all just to the black box section that we discussed. Both myself and Eleanor teach at universities and have discussed previously how the endless black boxes that you can see on screen, which I don't know if any colleagues here who also teach, and I can see some nods there from Andrew, and the lack of intimacy and the kind of feeling of isolation that can create. And we actually were, I wouldn't say shocked, but really happily surprised by the fact that our participants felt comfortable enough to put their cameras on. People don't for a variety of reasons, but the fact that they felt able to was wonderfully surprising. Eleanor, I don't know if you want to add about anything else.
Yeah, I think Natasha and myself both went in very optimistic at the same time. Like that's just kind of our nature. So I think that we were hopeful and optimistic. But I think definitely concern was around performance and being able, because it was such an important part to us. It was the thing that brought us together, being able to facilitate performance online. And yeah, it's been so joyful. I think that's the word to use, watching those performances and you really, you feel that connection and you feel it within yourself. It is that sense of embodiment, and kind of, even though you're in the digital realm, there is that feeling of liveness at the same time. So that's been really exciting to explore that, and definitely helpful for our teaching to kind of experience both of those spaces and try out new things. And so it's been great.
I'll unmute myself when I talk to you. So it's fabulous. I was wondering where you got all those great ideas about describing yourself as weather for the day and things like that, and just allowing people that space to start just talking like you were talking about. I think that, I don't know if colleagues agree, but that idea of people feeling very worried about talking on a camera, because that's not what we do. We talk in person and in groups and in a real way. And it's a really interesting project that you guys sort of kind of created and then diverted and then recreated online. So it's fabulous.
I was going to say, I really like the string connections that you did in the physical space, but I would love to find out if there's a way to digitally, trace connection points as well using some sort of a platform.
I'm sure some very clever person has figured it out. I think we all went nuts over the word thing this morning from Nicola. Like, That's amazing. So there's got to be one somewhere. Some clever person has got something going on. So Anna has kindly given her response in the chat. So if everyone wants to kind of click over to the chat, I'm not going to read out Anna's words, but Anna's response is there. She's taken quite a lot of time to put that together for us. So that's fabulous. So I'd just like to thank everyone again for coming. It's a very odd way to do this, but I think it's worked just about. So thank you so much for sort of coming to this panel, delivering to this panel, and I'll let you all go to the next panel. Thank you so much, everyone. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you and goodbye.
So it's Andrew to begin with. So welcome everybody to the Communities and Communication Conference, Stafford University. So this session is the Altered Communities session, so particularly relevant. So the way the communities have been changed during the COVID pandemic, so it's affected everybody. So a whole new way of working. So we've got a few talks. We've got 4 talks coming up. Our first talk is from Andrew Lee. And Andrew is a multidisciplinary artist exploring modes of intimacy and audience-performer interaction through autobiographic practice. Andrew's artistic director of the Midnight Florist Collective and producer for Ergo, I hope I'm saying this right, FISMIS PLC, and formerly Y Festival with the B-Side and South Bank Centre. And he has recently registered to undertake his PhD at Chichester University. So cool. So Andrew, I'll hand it over to you. If you want to kind of share your presentation?
Perfect, I will do. So I don't actually have when I'm supposed to change the slides on my little script here, so this could be fun. But here we go. A stranger stands between you and your authority-mandated work task. Getting too close to this stranger could mean your death sentence. The question is, are you walking to your day job during the COVID-19 pandemic, or are you playing in a Sloth's 2018 online video game Among Us? The answer, why not both? As in-person social interaction became the primary mode of transmission of the COVID-19 virus, alternative modes of social interaction were adopted to maintain interpersonal communication. Games, both analog and digital, became a safe and engaging mode of communication, often enabled by the accelerated developments in video conferencing software such as Zoom. For the interest of the conference, this presentation seeks to analyse Among Us and its internal game structures through the lens of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to assert that new modes of connection are created by the players while simultaneously allowing them to process the pandemic's state of exception within a zero-threat digital environment. I will do this by creating an assemblage of 5 key ideas: Goffman's definition of the situation, Anderson's imagined communities, Agamben's state of exception, Fisher-Licht's autopoietic feedback loop, and Murray's procedural authorship. Erving Goffman wrote that when an individual enters the presence of others, they commonly seek to acquire information about him or to bring into play information about him already possessed. Information about the individual helps to define the situation, enabling others to know in advance what he will expect of them and what they may expect of him. In the world of COVID-19, a new definition of the social situation has been developed. Masks, keeping distance, and hand sanitizer are all major features of this new definition. And when one breaks these social expectations, discomfort ensues. When everyone around you is wearing a mask, this visual information defines the situation and what is expected of you. In the 4 maps available in Among Us, the definition of the situation is equally understood. Up to 10 avatars stand in their personal protective equipment or bright shiny spacesuits, preparing to complete several mini-games to invoke their victory conditions. But something stands in their way. One or more of them are imposters. They may look like regular crewmates, but the imposter's victory conditions rely on killing off the crewmates one by one. How do they do this? By proximity. Hand sanitizer might not be needed in space, but distance certainly is. The definition of the situation within the game world is constantly being re-examined as I, in my avatar form, enter into the electrical room to complete one of my many tasks. I am halted by seeing someone else inside. Are they a crewmate? Are they an imposter? If I approach my task on the other side of the room, will they think me an imposter? How do I communicate that without the ability to speak to them? If playing on a public server, I can only communicate with the directional motion of my expressionless avatar. When playing with friends on a private server, however, it is not uncommon to use Zoom, Skype, or Discord to communicate via voice chat. Although most house rules require silence during play, speaking only in meetings held when called by a player or when the body is found. In the real world, we perform the awkward dance of avoidance in the face of potential collisions and/or COVID transmission. In Among Us, the same form of dancing is used to transmit information. Look at me, moving in circles. I'm here. I'm not killing you. I'm clearly a crewmate. Of course, the player you're signaling may interpret your circular dance as a ruse for them to let their guard down, for such is a mistrust of both the digital definition of Among Us and the physical definition of COVID-19. You can't be sure who has the potential to kill you. By hosting gatherings online in Among Us, players can engage with the same fear of proximity they experience outside their homes. But it is only in the online world where death is not permanent. The impermanence of an online death allows one to be reckless, to be the asymptomatic-like imposter, remove your mask and murder your friends, allowing a temporary reprieve from the anxiety caused by proximity in a viral pandemic. Benedict Anderson's notion of the imagined community was first posited in reference to nations. Now, nations of vastly different political, social, economic, and historical backgrounds have, under the pandemic, gained a globally shared experience. This shared experience has created a new imagined community of those living in unprecedented times. Anderson wrote that this community is imagined because members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them. Yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. We have been brought together in a new imagined community as citizens of a pandemic, and yet the image of our communion is a deeply unequal one, as the upper and middle classes who can afford to work from home do so, and our most vulnerable, our minimum waged key and frontline workers, contracted the virus at higher rates than any other demographic. But as Anderson continues, it is imagined as a community because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as a deep, horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible not so much to kill as willingly die for such limited imaginings. In Among Us, an imaginary community is developed between the crewmates. Imaginary as they do not know those who belong to the same affiliation, and a community as they are willing to die, albeit digitally, for their new nation, their team. In the digital experience, the player becomes what Anderson describes as a long-distance nationalist, who holds no actual attachment to this nation, as in the player's eyes it is a temporary configuration built purely on the arbitrary digital allocation of the crewmate role, but irregardless, finds it tempting to play identity politics by participating in the conflicts of his imagined Heimat, or home. How does the player connect with the game world and as a result connect with the strangers they are playing with? During the pre-game lobby, players have the opportunity to alter their avatar's physical appearance through the selection of their PPE spacesuit color. By enabling this form of customization, a player invested in their avatar and as a result the game world. But as color choices are limited, it breeds competition with your fellow players to get your preferred color first. The competition connects the player through competitive kinship, which is further tested when the crewmate and imposter roles are allocated. A conscious choice of geo-connection is made when selecting the server location to play from. Among Us had a relatively small player base until the pandemic. The rise in players has resulted in server strain, meaning players often have to choose servers located in Asia or the Americas rather than a European server. By consciously choosing a server location before play, the player is making a direct choice of geo-connection rather than leaving it up to the algorithm. It enforces their attachment to the imagined community and their avatar. With so many players engaging in foreign servers, a communal language was developed in order to cope with language barriers. Sus, a shortening of suspicious. To vent, the process of an imposter using a vent to move from one room to another, a mechanic that is only available to the imposter role. Or even the elusive third imposter, meaning a crewmate who plays so badly they end up causing the imposter victory, or all methods of connecting one player to another. Just gonna do a bit of hydration. So before I move on to Agamben's state of exception, I would first like to distance myself entirely from his position on COVID-19, most notably his statements regarding the irrational and entirely unfounded emergency measures adopted against an alleged epidemic, and his liberal use of the National Research Council's data to imply that the symptoms would be mild to moderate and be akin to a sort of influenza. As a care home manager during the entirety of the pandemic, I have seen firsthand the necessity of such measures, and although I use his theory to explore COVID-19, I reject in their entirety his views on the matter. The state of exception, as posited in Agamben's 2005 book of the same name, explores the denigration of the basic rights of a territory's citizens by its sovereign power, enacted in a time of public emergency which threatens the life of the nation and the existence of which is officially proclaimed, in order for that power to operate in total authority outside of pre-existing ruling law. He explains, in every case, the state of exception marks a threshold at which logic and praxis blur with each other, and a pure violence without logos claims to realise an enunciation without any real reference. Within the UK government's response to the pandemic, an argument could be made for the beginnings of a state of exception, where the ruling power has operated at odds with pre-existing forms of governance, such as the UK government's disregard of sages' advice. The state of exception was proclaimed at the daily press briefings held from March 16, 2020, where a running tally of the infected and the dead kept the need for the state of exception at the forefront of the public mind. In Among Us, a similar game mechanic exists in the form of the emergency meeting, called by a player from a singular location on the map or by reporting a dead body when in its proximity. The emergency meeting automatically teleports the player to the same location, where, through the game's own state of exception, their autonomy and more specifically their mobility is removed, reducing them to a voice chat if player via conferencing software, or if not, a group messaging platform, similar to the nation's use of Twitter to discuss each briefing. The first phase of the emergency meeting is the visualization of the dead. Here, the surprise of unknown murders sets the tone, where the group must justify their actions and point out sus behavior. A time limit is set on this discussion, which culminates in the second phase, voting on the player one believes to be the imposter. The player with the most votes is unceremoniously removed from play via an airlock, volcano, or another form of elaborate digital execution. Only when a meeting is called and the state of exception proclaimed can the crewmates go against their implicit passive nature and inflict death. Even elements of the communal language developed around Among Us sustain the real-world state of exception in-game. To vent, or to vent kill, is the process whereby an imposter uses the vent to escape from the scene of a murder, or to quickly enter a room and commit one. Death by ventilation, then, is one of the hardest to avoid as a crew member, a situation echoed by the ill effects of coronavirus, where only 1 in 5 healthy adults will survive if placed on a ventilator. That statistic rapidly drops for elderly patients and those with underlying health conditions. While playing the game, a connection is developed between players via a series of autopoietic feedback loops. First imagined by Erica Fisher-Litch as a series of self-replicating exchange of focus between performer and audience, where the performance occurs not on stage, but between the actors and spectators, and even between the spectators themselves. It exists in the middle ground between the presentation of the artistic artifact and its perception by the audience. But in Among Us, a digitized version of this feedback loop exists in the in-between space, between the players and their actions on screen, as well as between each other. Fisher-Litch states that while presence brings forth the human body in its materiality as energetic body and living organism, technical and electronic media create the impression of human presence by dematerializing and disembodying it. It is this impression of human presence that allows for intimate and human connection through the collaborative autopoiesis of the feedback loop. In the same way that video images of our faces in this very digital conference give off the impression of materiality via dematerialization and representation, so do the avatars of Among Us, giving off that same impression, representing the dematerialized self in a digital form, allowing for the representational but still very real bodily co-presence of actors and spectators that enables and constitutes performance. In the playing of Among Us, in the performance of the players as crewmates and imposters, very real connections are made. Janet Murray in Hamlet on the Holodeck posits the idea of procedural authorship, a form of feedback loop developed purely for the digital sphere, built through the collaborative story-making by participants within and with a digital environment. By playing Among Us, the participants develop a shared story, not as involved as the grand narratives of role-playing games, and yet by lacking a grand narrative all its own, it allows those immersed within it to develop their own meta-stories via procedural authorship. Through these meta-narratives and the game's internal structures, we can process a small part of the pandemic experience. She explains that a good story serves to give us something safely outside of ourselves because it is made by someone else upon which we can project our feelings. As our experience of the pandemic was reduced to screens, both as work, play, socialization, and information, digital narratives offer us the opportunity to enact stories rather than merely witness them. It is in this enacting that allows us to remain engaged in a world that prohibits our participation. She continues by stating that enacted events have a transformative power that exceeds both the narrated and conventionally dramatized events, because we assimilate them as personal experience. The emotional impact of enactment within an immersive environment is so strong that virtual reality installations have been found to be effective for psychotherapy. As the pandemic has stretched on and our existence has moved ever more online, the digital culture has taught us that although a mediatized presence is not the same as a physical one, it is nevertheless able to create strong and emotional connections between representations of ourselves online, be it represented face on a Zoom call or an avatar in an online game. Complex sociological processes are at work, such as procedural authorship of an online space, feedback loops between participants, or the creation of imagined communities that allows us to process the startling changes brought on by the pandemic and its state of exception in a way that feels less like government-mandated isolation and more like sustained, socially distanced connection, just waiting for a time when we can be together again. In the absence of physical proximity, a dematerialized version of ourselves in a brightly colored spacesuit allows us one way of connecting and processing a wildly different world.
Hi, Andrew. Just 5 minutes left.
Oh, well, 5 minutes, and I've only gone and finished. So,
Oh,
look at that.
that's brilliant. Fantastic. Perfect timing. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. So just to kind of mention that we're going to do the questions at the end. So if you can put your questions that you have in the Q&A. And now we'll move on to the second presenter, which is Camille Inson. And Camille is an award-winning Esto-Canadian writer, media artist, multidisciplinary theatre and performance maker and researcher, currently based out of Toronto, Canada. I understand it's currently about 9 o'clock in the morning in Canada. Camille recently completed a MA in performance practice as research at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, and is currently undertaking a PhD in information and knowledge media design at the University of Toronto. So, and Camille can be found can be found online at camilleinson.com, and you can find that information in the kind of conference PDF kind of file. So Camille, I'll hand over to you. If you can try and share your presentation, and remember to unmute yourself as well. And if you have any problems, I can share that for you.
Thank you so much. I will say before I go that I do have an 8-month-year-old kitten with me. His name's Leo. He's a little cone head at the minute because he's got an ulcer on his eye, and he loves jumping up on my laptop. So you may see him once or twice during this. Alas, this is the work from home condition.
I think most people will approve of that.
Yeah, he's a really good icebreaker, I found. Okay, so I'm going to be doing this. Please let me know if this works.
Yeah, excellent. We can see that.
Amazing. Okay.
Cool.
All right, so hello everyone. As mentioned, my name is Camille Inson, that's INTSON, and I am a multidisciplinary artist and practitioner researcher, currently based out of Toronto, Canada. As he said, I'm also a PhD student at the University of Toronto within the Faculty of Information, and my degree is a doctorate in information with collaborative specializations in sexual diversity studies and knowledge media design. And beyond my academic work, my performance work and conceptual art has been premiered across Canada and often explores themes of queer intimacy and sexuality, sociocultural memory, and what it means to be human in an increasingly technological world. My kitten is wreaking havoc in the room right now, so if you hear a bunch of hustling and bustling around, that's him playing with a ball. So today I'm going to be talking to you about, as a good shoot off of the last presentation, digital intimacy and a practice-based research project that I've called Between Space, which is an online experience designed to facilitate intimacy between myself and online participants, and that takes the form of a multimedia web installation. So just to give you some background context of this work, from the years 2019 to 2020, I was a Master of Arts student in Performance Practices Research at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London. I was doing a lot of experimental performance work around objects and the agency of objects, and I was experimenting with intermedial technologies. So here you can see me playing around with live cinema and creating assemblages of digital and physical materials as part of an emerging transmedial sort of performance practice. And when the pandemic hit, all of this work ended because we were completely barred from campus, and my interests were sort of forced to shift to digital work. Now, when the pandemic started, as many of us were, I was sort of completely alone and touch deprived in a country where I knew next to no one. And I became really hyper attuned to the physical spaces, materials, and objects in my vicinity. It was almost as if my world had contracted to the size of my flat in North London. But at the same time, I felt this overwhelming sense of expansion by my constant use of digital technologies like my phone and my laptop as means of connection to the world. So all of this led to a performance-based research inquiry project that I called Between Space. And I began with the sort of research question, which was, are digital spaces capable of producing some form of digital co-presence or togetherness that facilitates intimacy at a time of social interaction? And this question for me moves beyond the idea of social media as that space of connection, because I actually find platforms like Zoom and Facebook and Instagram really quite isolating. They're predicated on the idea of connection, but they feel very lonely to me, which is why I sort of wanted to push my work away from that stuff. And so I yearned to design something that made participants feel as if they were undergoing an experience with me that simulated a kind of physical co-presence and feelings of togetherness and a kind of intimacy through an intermedial interface. So what is Between Space? What is this project? So in its essence, Between Space is an interactive map of a flat during the first lockdown when I lived in England. It's transmedial, so it's part performance, part electronic lit project, part installation, part new media. There's a lot of moving parts to it, so to speak, and the quote unquote story or experience that it tells unfolds across a lot of different media. The work takes the form of a website, and at the end of this presentation, I'll be sending you the link in case any of you wish to engage further with it later. And viewers are invited to explore various rooms and objects in my domestic space through the work, which reveals some personal writings and anecdotes. And viewers are encouraged to write back to me and share their own experiences of isolation within the world of the site. So now I'm going to show you some stills images of the project to give you an idea of aesthetics and how it flows before delving into the qualitative research. So in this first image, you can see the door leading to the inside of the flat. This comes after a welcome screen, which introduces the project conceptually and quote unquote welcomes you into the space. There's a video that you can see on the bottom right. This is an image, but it is a video in the project. That's my hand turning the key and unlocking the door to my apartment. With screens like this, I was attempting to replicate social conventions of inviting someone into your home, opening the door for them, asking them to step into the foyer, all things that are not normalized nor allowed, depending on your lockdown rules during the pandemic. And right now, I've heard the situation in the UK is better than it was, and patios are open and things like that. In Canada, it is the opposite. We are in full lockdown and numbers are worse than they've ever been. So, woohoo. The second image is this of the living room. As you can see, the back door to the garden has been highlighted blue. So it's the job of the participant or viewer to hover their mouse around each of the locations. When something like a door or a piece of furniture or an object can be clicked on and explored further, it comes up in blue when the mouse is hovered over it. So it feels like a bit of a game. You know, participants are peeking around the room, finding the places that can be clicked and going there. It's a bit of a scavenger hunt type feel to it. This is a picture of an animation, which is one of my favorite screens in the project. When you click on this chair, which is positioned in the living room that you see back there, it starts animating with this white text, all of the different uses of the chair. So it says, you know, where I complete my work, where I spend most of my time, where I spill food, where I write, where I nap. And for me, this chair represents that convergence of personal space with workspace, which is something that we've all experienced during the pandemic. And there was a period of time where I spent many, many hours a day on this chair for different purposes. And I became sort of obsessed with it as an object in my domestic sphere. And this one shows you one of the text boxes. So here you see a little blurb I've written about being able to tell what time it is only by the angle that the light comes in through the window. And it asks people to share with me, how are you keeping time nowadays? So when participants answer, the messages go directly to my phone. They would ping up on my phone whenever somebody clicked share with me, and it's completely anonymous unless people want to put their names at the end. You don't have to answer as well, but if you do, the text box reveals another personal story and an act of reciprocation. And then last but not least, this is one of the most visceral screens in the project. You've got 3 videos here that can be described as nothing more than bad ASMR. It's a close-up of an armpit shave, a toothbrushing, and a toenail clipping. It's one of the panels that people have reacted the strongest to, and another example of how the project can be rather intimate in another way. Okay, so qualifying intimacy. As I've mentioned earlier, this project for me was about facilitating digital intimacy, but one of the core questions for myself as a researcher has to be, how does one go about qualifying intimacy? Because intimacy is a quite subjective concept, and it's hard to fix in definition. So for this project, I've adopted a framework from psychology, and specifically from a psychologist whose name is Karen Prager, who defines intimacy as a superordinate concept under which other more basic concepts are assumed. So we see here under intimacy, we've got intimate interactions and intimate relationships. We're looking specifically at interactions here. So she defines those as dyadic communicative exchanges that exist within a clearly designated space and time framework. And so there are 2 components to this intimate interaction. There are experiences and there are behaviors. Behaviors are the actual observable behaviors that people engage in when interacting intimately, whether these are verbal or nonverbal. So the examples given below are self-disclosure or touch. And intimate experiences are the feelings and perceptions that people have during and because of their intimate interactions. So what I was testing for was actually intimate experiences based on my adaptation of intimate behaviors from in-person to online. In real life, intimate behaviors, as I said, would be physical touch, eye contact, body language, intimate conversation. And online, a lot of those are obsolete or made different. We can't touch each other, obviously. However, we can have material interactions with our laptops when we click on things, when we type things. That is our sense of touch. We can't have body contact, but with photographs and videos, we can see or experience the body in ways that we can't in the flesh. For example, this horrific still back there. And sometimes the anonymity of online spaces can make people more comfortable sharing or disclosing things. And these are all things I had to consider when designing the work. And in the context of between space, intimate behaviors that I adapted are like clicking around my private space. That act of clicking is something material, right? Reading intimate stories, exchanging information about lockdown. There's a part in the garden where it feels like we're sneaking onto my neighbor's part of the lawn together. It's a little mischievous. Those are all adaptations of behaviors. So by adapting intimate behaviors from what they would be considered in person to what was possible through a digital interface, I then interviewed participants who engaged with the work, what their feelings and perceptions were of those digitally intimate behaviors to gauge what their experience was. So for the research design, it was a consent-based approach, which means that I always asked participants whether they wanted to continue or go forward, what they wanted to see. They have a lot of agency over what is coming, so it doesn't feel like I'm forcing intimate anecdotes onto them. It's also, as I've mentioned a little bit previously, trying to follow the social conventions of letting someone into your space, opening the door, showing them where the rooms are, sort of narrating that experience. So participants were redirected to a Google Form survey post-experience, and there were a lot of open-ended questions asked. As you can see, some of them are below. How did you feel about moving in the space? Did you feel welcomed? What was your relationship to me as the host? Did you feel like you got to know me? Did you feel connected? And then last but not least, what is intimacy to you? How would you define it? Did this project provide an experience of intimacy? Why or why not? So these open-ended questions that are quite phenomenological in nature were important for me to ask because I was testing the success of those adaptations of intimate behaviors. I wanted to see what people felt and thought, what worked, what didn't, what felt intimate and what didn't. So here's some survey responses that I have from the initial Google Form responses. And it really did work for some people. They thought that the whole thing felt quite intimate. They thought that what I shared felt authentic. They felt welcomed. They enjoyed the experience. They felt with me. As you can see, they said they felt like nothing was off limits. Citing the consent-based part of it, allowing they liked the fact that it was consent-based and that they were given options whether to explore further. But then others were more critical. And while they also felt that the experience was one of intimacy, they did ask me some quite interesting critical questions, which is, you know, what am I being intimate with? Is it the space? Is it you? Is it the website? Is it the work? Is it the assemblage of all of these things together? And this was a really interesting thing for me to think about. Because what this means is we have to consider how we're not just intimate with each other online, but with our computers, with objects, because all of these things together contribute to the effect of digital intimacy. When you're on the website, clicking on my space, you're doing something physical, which contributes to the unveiling of some intimate story or narrative. And I think that paying attention to the interactivity between bodies, texts, and technologies can breed some really interesting work. I believe that digital intimacy is not solely human to human, but also human to object, involving all objects and technologies between the persons involved in dyadic communicative exchange. Another sort of interesting thing that arose through these survey responses is that people talked a lot about the experience of typing back to me in those text boxes. So a lot of people shared their own experiences after reading what I had to say and felt quite vindicated in the process. As you can see, participants said that they said that they could offer up vulnerable things in return to my vulnerability. They felt power in being able to submit these responses anonymously, which is a feature of that online design. And also some of the prompts really resonated with their experiences of what they were thinking about and how they were processing the lockdown of that time. But others did not, because they either didn't want to, or they responded back to me because they felt like they had to, because they felt as if that was the nature of the project, which is an interesting thing, because I wasn't policing who was or wasn't writing back to me, especially again, because the text boxes are anonymous and I couldn't do that because of the design. But people still felt as if there were social conventions at play and that reciprocity was being asked of them. So a couple participants said that they didn't have to write back to feel like the project was intimate. They felt as if they had undergone an intimate experience, regardless of whether there was this communication between myself and them. And those participants cited the intimacy of the project as coming from just reading about my experiences in lockdown and personally identifying with them. However, this lack of reciprocity left me as a facilitator in a quite vulnerable or compromised position. As I'd sort of hinted at earlier, during the week this project premiered, which is at a festival called the Brink Festival, hosted by the Central School of Speech and Drama, these responses would get hooked up to my phone. And it was the coolest thing ever, being in this space and feeling like, oh, somebody's in my bathroom right now, or somebody's in my bedroom sending me messages from there. I did really feel that way at times. It was very, very cool for me to experience, as I was in that space that I'd sort of adapted online. But to an extent, to have extended an invitation and for it not to be reciprocated left me feeling a bit sad, or perhaps a bit taken advantage of, which is an interesting dynamic or complication of digital intimacy. Because when anonymity comes into play, people can shapeshift or hide themselves behind their laptops or behind their words. And perhaps this fact makes some people more eager to share intimate details of themselves, which we have seen in survey responses, because there is no judgment and because they can't be identified. But at the same time, that lack of in-person exchange absolves them of the social responsibility of making an effort to reciprocate, right? And it's an interesting tension within the concept of, is that the 5-minute mark?
Yeah, that's the 5-minute mark.
Great. It's an interesting tension within the concept of digital intimacy, and certainly not the only tension within the work. So I believe, as some concluding remarks, that digital intimacy comes to us as simultaneously present and absent, corporal and virtual, embodied and disembodied. I believe that such an intimacy requires a deconstruction and dispersal of self across technologies and materials, which is at once necessary for the facilitation of digital intimacy and precisely the reason that it fails. I believe that to be digitally intimate is not to be intimate with another human being per se, or only with another human being per se, but with all of the objects and materials between us as well. And I believe that Between Space is quite playful with this idea. Despite the fact that the work had a very positive reception, I do feel as if there's an element of failure intrinsic to it, just because of the way that I think digital intimacy will always be limited. But I also believe that failure can be generative. As Sarah Jane Bales writes, failure produces. And I believe that digital intimacy as a concept will always be paradoxical, because digital conditions create, but also destroy the conditions for intimate interactions. Intimacy will always remain a perpetual possibility through digital technologies, even if those technologies themselves are inherently isolating. And so I believe that the next project, which tackles digital intimacy, specifically in performance or in transmedial art making, must continue to work along this paradox and find new ways of heightening interactions between humans and computers to deepen the technological scopes of these performances. I'm really interested in the possibility of virtual and augmented reality projects to tackle questions of digital intimacy, and the ways in which all of these ideas can be pushed forward as technology continues to develop, and as we collectively witness a further integration of immersive digital technologies into art and performance work. So that is my presentation. This is the Between Space link if anybody is interested. I will also post it in the chat if anyone wants to sort of save it for later. And you can go visit it as you wish. And the text boxes are still linked up to my phone. So although I'm no longer living in the UK, you can send me messages from another time, element of time travel to this. So that is that. And I have to figure out now how to stop sharing my screen. Okay, there we go.
You've done it. Well done.
Awesome.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you, Camille. It was really, really interesting. Okay, so yeah, just a reminder, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A and we will ask them at the end. And also if you want to kind of make general comments, put them in the chat. So now we're going to move on to, hopefully I can say this correctly, Grzegorz Kowalczyk. Was that close enough?
That's okay.
Okay. And Aleksander Zeliga-Potocki.
Zeliga-Potocki. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so Grzegorz has an MA in Journalism and Media Studies, a BA in Political Science, and is a journalist at the Polish, I won't say the name, but the Daily Legal newspaper, and is a PhD candidate at the Doctoral School of Social Sciences at the University of Warsaw, and a member of the Laboratory of Media Studies, and is interested in political communication and social media. And Aleksander has an MA and is a PhD candidate also at the Doctoral School of Social Sciences at the University of Warsaw, and also a member of the Laboratory of Media Studies. And his doctoral thesis is to come on televised political ads. It's a semiotic and biometric study, and is interested in semiotics and popular culture. So fantastic. So if I can hand over to you now. So I'll let you know when you're 5 minutes, when you've got 5 minutes left. So you've got 20 minutes in total. I'll let you know when you've got 5 minutes left. And yeah, if you want to share your presentation, if you have any problems sharing your presentation, I've got a copy and I can share that for you.
Okno aplikacji. Zaznaczać i udostępniać. Okay, so thank you very much for your kind introduction, and let me begin. Let's rock with our topic, which is football clubs communication during COVID-19 pandemic. We have focused on the last year spring lockdown, and what we have prepared is an overview of few famous football clubs' communication during by social media portals. Why is football so important that we made it a subject of our presentation? There are at least two answers, and the first comes from, let's say, cultural studies. So we don't see football just as a sport game, but rather as a cultural phenomenon and a bunch of social practices around it. So there are questions like what does it mean to be a fan? What does it mean to support your team? And what values does this team represent? The second one is a marketing approach where football club is seen as a brand which communicates with its stakeholders and works on profits of its market capitalization. The synthesis of these two approaches can be seen as most of football clubs use the strategy of relationship marketing and communicate the symbolic non-material values to keep their fans engaged and supportive. How we have chosen the clubs that were researching. These are 4 most followed clubs in the European and world football. These are Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United and the Juventus. And also these are the only 4 clubs which have over 100 million followers. And how the search was conducted. We have used the Twitter search engine because it allows to search for specific brand, specific user, and in the specific period of time. So it was very helpful. And when we had this basis, then we started to search also at Facebook or Instagram using such keywords as coronavirus, pandemic, stay at home, and so on. So let's turn the clock back, and we are in the March of 2020. The coronavirus is here with us in Europe and is still more and more devastating. So football clubs, football organizations, and governments agreed that it is essential and necessary to suspend the games, suspend all the competitions. And what does it mean for football clubs communication? It means there is a lack of content because the match training routine is interrupted. So there is a lack of content, and there are strategies, new strategies that need to be developed.
Sorry, I've got a quick question. Would you be able to put your slides into slideshow mode?
Excuse me, didn't understand.
Could you put your slides into like a slideshow mode? So could you make your slides full screen?
I guess we have this. If not, of course, we'll do it in a moment. So let's try again. I believe that we have the slide project. So once again. Let's try it now. Mówiącego slajdu. Are we okay now?
No, we can only see PowerPoint. We can still see slides though, so if you just leave it as it is, I think that'll be fine.
Okay, sorry, but we are really surprised that it looks so to you.
Okay, don't worry. We can still see slides, so if you just feel free to carry on.
Okay. So I'll go on. So here are a few most important threats in the framing of coronavirus and pandemic issues. So it's staying at home, both as a pathway to keep safe and active. It is COVID-19 as a medical struggle, and it's also club as being supportive to fun. So it's a reverse of usual situation. And these are also encouragements to funds for supporting the charity activities. First, there are a group of stay-at-home actions, for example, RM Fans en Casa, so at home, from Spanish, Real Madrid Fans at Home. And why is it so important? Firstly, this is the supportive function for governmental communicates, so keep safe, stay at home. Secondly, as it's a sport brand, it encourages you to stay active at home. And finally, home appears to be a new place where you meet with your favorite club, with your favorite players, and other fans. So this is the place where you share your passion for the club, for the football in the whole. So we are all separate, but we are all together as well. Next issue is fundraising, and the one hand of this issue is, let's say, classic collecting money, like Juventus or Manchester United initiatives, just to support, donate for, let's say, medical professionals to help those who suffer from coronavirus. The interesting case is announced tournament, charity tournament, established by Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, and Inter Milan. And the other hand of fundraising is healthcare. So it's collecting sanitaries. For example, FC Barcelona used its foundation to do so. And Real Madrid, for example, made an action, let's fill the Bernabeu, so Real Madrid Stadium, with solidarity. And they used their home to collect all this medical stuff to help professionals. And finally, we go to new forms of relationships with fans. And I think that we can tell there are at least 3 types of these relationships. First are direct. Of course, they are mediated by the web, but except this, there are, let's say, direct in the pandemic era. And the examples are when a fan can chat with his favorite player or can be surprised with a call from his favorite player. And the second type is mediated interaction, where there is a gatekeeper, journalist, for example. Like here on the left, you can see the journalist from Barca TV making an interview with player Frankie de Jong of FC Barcelona. And finally, there are, maybe it's hard to say interactions, but it is also a kind of social activity when a fan can observe interactions among players. For example, you could be a member of a video call where FC Barcelona players were talking to each other, spending times and keeping together. And now I'll pass the voice to Grzegorz. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So an important element of social media communication of clubs was to keep the spirits of fans locked at home. Such messages were accompanied by pictures of players from the past matches or their video statements. It could be said that in this case, the authority of footballers is used to keep hope alive. Since football is associated with values, clubs were willing to play this role. In this way, clubs referred to sports ideas such as bravery, beliefs in success, and tenacity, and transferred these values to the COVID-19 time. Clubs have taken skills associated with sports and transferred them into social reality. And the photo shows the Juventus player Bonucci, who plays a vital role as team leader and club legend. He often motivates others and is also a symbol of commitment to the club. His image is precisely how the clubs present themselves in their messages to restore the hope of returning. In this case, the clubs combine the frame of sport competition with the fight against COVID-19. The clubs are also introduced online activities for children. They demonstrate in this way that the youngest fans or parents are frequent recipients of club messages. Clubs presented themselves as friendly to the youngest, and therefore actions for children are relatively frequent form of activity. The simplest form was the online transfer of existing actions. Juventus, for example, moved online their regular art competition for visualization of the club logo. Another form was to introduce the activities, new activities. For example, FC Barcelona initiated an action in which the young players from academies could show off their works. And another way was to encourage interaction without coordinated actions. We can see Manchester United, which used that option with the product of the Lego Group, a company cooperating with the club. 4 main ways of replacing emotions can be distinguished. Beyond just statements or interactions, clubs have tried to make fans curious about their core business, so football. There are several ways in which this has been done. They released footage of footballers training at home, showing their preparations, their training, physical strength and speed were to be admired, and so on. Another common way was to refer to the past. In this way, historical materials were used as a collection of the best performances. A unique form was the broadcasting of entire historical matches. On the basis of historical broadcast, the clubs arranged the entire narrative. An example is the broadcast of the 2019 match between Juventus and Torino. This is specific because it's a derby which was won the last minute for Juventus. The club encouraged people, its audience, to watch the spot on broadcast on YouTube. The profile presented the lineups and published posts related to what was currently happening on the pitch during the broadcast. Everything ended with joy after scoring the winning goal. The fans commented upon the event, somehow reliving the football emotions in their homes. Clubs have also sought to generate excitement on an ongoing basis through esports competitions, which have provided an arena for competition, while also allowing activity to be combined with charity and heritage reminder. For example, Manchester United, thanks to esports, took part in the Solidarity Tournament, so charity event, participated in the promotion of Pro Evolution Soccer, while also trying to appeal to an older audience by recalling the role of Luis Saha, the team's former striker. Real Madrid, which took part in the La Liga Santander Challenge, boasted the triumph of player Marco Asensio. There have also been posts in which the game has taken only entertainment function only. We can see that in the case with Juventus on Instagram. After more than a week, when it was clear that the resumption of leagues would not happen soon, the sponsors decided to take part in a new line of club communication. Through the clubs, sponsors communicated about their CSR activities, about fights with COVID-19, Real Madrid reporting on the production of disinfectants by Nivea, and Manchester United on the production of masks by Chevrolet. Sponsors, we can see here Jeep and Juventus, for example, also participated in other messages. They sponsored goal reminder cycles or took part in consoling fans. Juventus wrote, for being tested is our nature. Winning the next challenge is our soul. Turning to the differences between the platforms, we highlighted a few in our analysis. Above all, the communication strategies on Facebook and Twitter were the same. They performed similar functions. Very often, the content was the same, even though on Facebook there is no limit of characters. Nevertheless, over time, the message began to be nuanced, and Twitter became, as always, a service for quick messages. In contrast to these platforms, Instagram had a complementary function. During our work, we also what the clubs were not communicating. Despite the fact the club media made sure that their messages were positive, there was no fear associated with death or disease. There was no escalating number of illnesses, of course. Fans were not informed about changes within the club. Along with the training sessions, sport content returned. The exception was real posts about the death of former CEO Lorenzo Sanz. However, as here we can see on Twitter, these posts were also quite brief. It cannot be said that Real introduced mournful communication afterward. To conclude, the message of the material studied was positive, filling fans with confidence in winning and getting through a difficult time. It maintained the fans' faith and bond with the club through messages related to the players' activities and the club's tradition. Clubs introduced new methods to maintain relationship, but also tried to sustain the use of new tools. They adopted content and they support lockdown restrictions. Clubs using history and interactivity wanted to get closer to the supporters, and as we think, quantitative research based on the analysis of likes and shares would allow seeing how successful these attempts were. So thank you very much. That's all from us, and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Okay, so yeah, just a reminder to if you can kind of put questions in the Q&A, and now we'll hand over to Eliza. Let's get the notes up. Eliza Matasiak. Hopefully, I said that correctly.
Eliza Matusiak, it will be correct.
Okay, thank you. And Eliza is a PhD student at the Department of Journalism and Social Communication at the University of Lodz, and in the center of her research interests is documentary and fictional audible art. And Eliza is working on a dissertation about interactive ergodic radio plays, and she's published the monography about representations of Shoah in artistic radio. Okay, so brilliant. So Eliza, if I can just pass over to you. Did you have a presentation?
Yes, thank you very much. I will show you my presentation. So let me do it. I hope you can see it or not.
If we can't see it, it's not a problem. I will share it for you. Something's popping up now. Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will do it again because I've got some problems, I think, with my internet connection also. I don't know.
Okay. We did see it briefly, I think.
Okay. It works now?
Yes, we can see that podcasting.
Yes. Okay, so thank you very much. And Today I'm going to talk about podcasting and communities which arise around podcasts and podcast series. And radio is constantly evolving along with technological development. Broadcasters have gained many new ways to reach audiences, including on-demand radio. According to Podcast Insight, 75% of the US population is familiar with the term podcasting, and it's up from 70% 2 years ago. Increasing the potential group of recipients, which the attention of the researcher referred to, means adjusting the radio content to the changing recipients' listening practices. The changing auditory environment is filled with diverse forms of communication, definable as a result of mediatization and technological advance. And today I'm going to talk about communities which are formed around specific podcast titles. I'm sorry. As you can see, here you've got podcast popularity across the globe, and the numbers, I think, are pretty impressive. My research materials will be 2 criminal podcasts, true crime podcasts, Death in Ice Valley in English, Thief Do Not Kill in Polish, and 1 popular scienceologist with Ali Ward in English also. And I'm going to analyze the content of indicated podcast, but what is the most important for me is to describe what characterizes communities which occur around them. The fans of podcasts and other texts of culture are hard to miss. In today's mediatized culture, they are the most responsive to movies, books, games, and what the most important for me today, podcast series. They form active, creative, and diverse communities around them. They collect and exchange knowledge. As Małgorzata Lisowska-Magdziarz has mentioned, fandom is one of the most revolutionary phenomena in contemporary culture. Fans are changing the structure of the internet, media market, and entire model of creating and receiving text. The contemporary fandom is a community of people connected by a tangle of various cultural, social, political, personal, and emotional tastes and affinities. Above all, it is a community of social and communication practices. From the real revolution that has taken place in the field of social communication in connection with interactive media, which are one of the most important fields for my research. Access to a huge amount of cultural material and the mutual exchange of roles between senders and recipients of this material has become possible at the same time, and it's quite new for using media. The far-reaching results of this revolution are something called the culture of participation, says Lisowska-Magdziarz. Before I talk about how communities around podcasts are formed, now let's explain what exactly podcasts are. The term podcasting was introduced by the BBC journalist Ben Hammersley, and it's a combination of particles pod, after the name of iPod, of course, and the cast from the word broadcast. The term used to describe the emerging phenomenon of production of audio content and putting it on the internet, but also with subscribes and download it wasn't in the past possible. Radio researcher Richard Berry says that like a lot of radio, podcasts are consumed alone, and like radio, they tend to be linear in their nature, but with the added convenience of being able to pause and rewind if desired. We can say that podcasting is a new phase of radio production. Both podcasting and radio have a lot in common. Common rules, mean of expressions, material, using of sound, using of silence, using of music, etc. But as Richard Berry has added, podcasting is unique form and has distinct characteristics. Unlike broadcast radio, it is movable, with the listener not being fixed to a time schedule. You can listen everything what you want, wherever you want, and in the place you want to do it. Perhaps more importantly, the listener is not fixed to a defined format of content and can mix genres, styles, format, and even language. Podcasting has been identified with grassroots, not corporate veneer, content that could not come into existence another way. Of course, we have commercial podcasts and podcasts made, like I already said, by BBC, for example, but it's connected and identified with grassroots in the first place. Leslie Grace McMurtry observed that in the internet age, the freedom to tell stories grows, and it can be done with using of podcasts. It's one way of doing it. The podcasts I have analyzed are, as I already mentioned, Death in Ice Valley. It is a documentary series. An identified body has been found, and the question is, who is she, or who was she? Why hasn't she been missed? It's done by BBC World Service and NRK, original podcast, of course, and it's investigated from almost half a century. So it's true crime, but based on investigation. The second one is Thief Do Not Kill, and it's a true crime podcast hosted by Justyna Mazur. And the author regularly tells the audience about crimes and mysterious disappearances, which took place mainly in Poland, but not only. Justyna Mazur doesn't conduct a journalistic investigation, so it's different than in Death in Ice Valley. But she collects all information available in the media, books, TV series, but she often contacts the families of the missing or even victims. And on the basis of all collected information, she tells a story recreating tragic events. And the last one, Ologies with Ali Ward, is far different than previous two. Ologies is a comedy science podcast. Ali Ward is a daytime Emmy Award-winning science correspondent for CBS and host of Did I Mention Invention? She invites specialists from various fields of science like dendrology, toxinology, sexuology, psychology, and many, many more, to talk lightly about all possible issues related to their fields of interest. At the end of each episode, she asks her guests the questions sent to her by listeners, so audience can be involved in each episode. Each of these podcasts is published by people with different professional background. Death in Ice Valley is hosted by Marit Higraff of Norway Public Radio NRK and Neil McCarthy of the BBC. Therefore, this is an example of a fully professional podcast, a journalistic investigation conducted by professional journalists. So fully professional work. Ologies is also hosted by a professional who works in media, but what is crucial here, Ali Ward is working on this podcast independently of her other media projects, and Ologies is not released by any radio or television station. And the last one, Thief Do Not Kill, is example of entirely grassroots creativity. Justyna Mazur had not previously hosted any program, and by the way, what is interesting, it has changed recently after the podcast success. She now's got a program on TV, and she created her materials in Do Not Kill completely independently. However, regardless of the author's backgrounds, each of the podcasts is strongly connected to radio's essential qualities. Radio, by its nature, is intimate medium. Users rarely listen to it as a collective, and often listeners are alone. As Richard Berry has noted, it is probably because radio invades this personal space that is viewed more fondly than other media. We trust it more, and we rely on it more because it's a blind medium. The listener paints the pictures and as such is more active in the process of consumption. It's not only hearing, it's listening, it's active. This characteristic of intimacy and blindness shared with podcasts enable podcasting to reach individuals and groups not normally found in mainstream radio. And listeners may feel that the producer is one of them, a member of community, whether defined by geography, ethnicity, culture, social group, or group of interest. What is also relevant, people listen to radio on their own, in like individuals, but they want to gather. So fans of each podcast join groups on social media, mainly on Facebook, to discuss and exchange impressions about materials they have listened to. And in my research, I focused on observing the traffic and exchange of messages in Facebook groups. Over the last year, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I have read that people listen more and more when pandemic has started. So I was observing groups of these podcasts, and I found the information that Voxnest, an audio technology company, has seen changes in podcast listenership in Italy, Spain, and United States and Europe as a whole, even in March and April last year, so at the beginning of the pandemic. In Italy, podcast category spirituality and family has grown by as much as 1,500% since the beginning of last year. The category family and art raised over 300%. The books category was popular in the United States, and while according to data from Acast, a podcast platform, only on the weekend of March from 21 to 22, podcast listenership increased by 7%. Global podcast consumption has increased significantly from March to April last year, growing 42% according to Voxnest. However, different countries have shown different consumption trends. In the same report, Voxnest shares that European podcast consumption is up 53%, Italy 29%, Spain 25%, but the United States is down 20%. Also, The Guardian says that Spotify credits podcast popularity for 24% growth in subscribers. This data shows that people want to listen to audio materials on demand, and isolation, a time of pandemic, in isolation in time of pandemic, this will grow. But what about communities of listeners? As Jenny Priest has observed, the use of the internet to link individuals with others sharing common interests provides the scaffolding for building communities that offer support, solidarity, information, and social capital. The human need for affiliation is at least as strong as the need for information. And first of all, we can see that social media groups are formed around each of the popular podcasts, and you can see numbers of members gathered in groups for this podcast. The group for listener of Defi Nice Valley has more than 33,000 members, 32,000 members for Feed Do Not Kill, and more than 80,000 for Ologies. So the number of members in these groups is significant, and in a way it illustrates both the popularity of the programs themselves, but also the primal need to create space for exchange of content for the community, especially in the time of isolation. The chat groups for this podcast can be examples. Okay, thank you. Can be examples for online communities. Jenny Priest has noted that pioneers of online community development and research, Howard Rheingold and Roxanne Hills, used the term online community to connote the intense of feelings of camaraderie, empathy, and support. Researchers focus on people who want to come together for particular purpose and who are guided by policies, including norms and rules, and supported by software. Also, as Amy Brackman pointed out, a more productive approach may be accept community as a concept with fuzzy boundaries. Of course, because of Jenny Priest's explanation, online community is strictly connected with internet culture, so it's in constant movement. Howard Rheingold describes online communities as a cultural aggregation that emerge when enough people bump into each other, often enough in cyberspace. And in the case of this podcast listeners group, we can say there are online communities formed by fan groups and fandoms. The word fandom can be used with at least two meanings. The first one describes a group of people connected by adoring a selected cultural text and showing it openly. The second is about a phenomenon of creative and participatory involvement in the consumption of the media text. Group devoted to indicated podcast merge both types of fandom. And people use this media to share impressions, to supplement information which are missed, ask about issues that are not being covered in episode, but also what is very interesting, they ask about advices of missing persons from their family in a true crime podcast groups. In Ologies, they ask about many scientific issues, but also often about threats related to health problems. So, of course, the topic of COVID-19 and vaccine was one of the most popular last year. According to Constance Ellis Porter, the key attribute can be summarized as 5 Ps of virtual communities. And its purpose, of course, to be a part of investigation in true crime, to be a part of community, to find help or support in the difficult situation. Place. They share the same place on the same platform, Facebook this time, but often and they want to communicate live, so they use lives on Facebook, but also on Instagram and YouTube. And it was very popular in time of pandemic last year to talk live after premiere of each episode in Feed Do Not Kill. And the profit model, a lot of groups is based on the same interest, but also in based on supporting hosts. So they used Patronite and Patreon. Today, fandom is not only about individual and collective admiration of favorite work, but also production, collection, exchange of opinions, knowledge, and creativity. But what's the most important is supporting each other. In summary, contemporary interactive media enables a fan to share thoughts about and interpretation with other fans. Fandom media use their practice itself. So at the same time, as a part of the wider set of media practices, is supporting each other in this group. Podcast online communities is example of emerging media model which create a space for people to be together in distance and in isolation. It is easier to be together, to create a community, and to listen to each other even when they can only write. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm open for your questions.
Oh, that's fantastic, guys. It's really interesting. I've got a question to ask you later. So I'll go through the questions in the Q&A then. So start off with Andrew. Andrew, do you think, ironically, Among Us, a game based on treachery, brings increased belonging between players through the shared story?
Absolutely. I think thing about it being ironic, and it's very counterintuitive, but actually it's what we do from our earliest ages, is we role play being competitive as a way of getting closer to one another. I call it competitive kinship. And even now, especially now in the digital environment, playing video games that are competitive, be it a shooter like Call of Duty or something along those lines, it's the competitive nature that allows you to get closer to the friend or colleague or whoever that you're playing with. And so I think it sort of seems quite counterintuitive, but actually it's what we do all the time. By being competitive, we build a much closer relationship with each other in all forms of life.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. For Camille, this is from Stephanie Steventon. Was there any other interactive media projects that inspired Between Space?
A combination of a few things inspired Between Space. I mean, I am a really huge fan of Sophie Calle, the French conceptual artist and photographer. And her sort of really quite intimate anecdotes and writings have inspired me for a very long time. And that definitely went into some of the writing that I had in the actual project. It was inspired by that. But I guess more than that, I really became very fascinated with electronic literature during lockdown. And I got very into J.R. Carpenter's work, which is so playful. I mean, being able to click on a story and have something develop, and sort of internet-based choose your own adventure type things really interested me. The mechanics and the poetics of J.R. Carpenter's work were very, very cool. Cool. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, cool. And another question: if you'd done the project outside of the crisis, do you think it would have brought you as close to strangers as it did within the crisis, if that makes sense? So do you think the crisis kind of was a more kind of an environment which kind of strangers would probably be more likely to interact with your Between Space than if there wasn't the COVID crisis?
Yes, I do think the crisis was a very large part of the framing of it. I would say almost essential. I don't know how people would have reacted to it if not in crisis time. Probably still, because the sort of voyeurism of it was a big pull for people, something that everyone was sort of commenting on. But for me, I think the fact that it was happening quite literally during a time where everybody wasn't, this is before the restrictions eased at all, like for anyone. So every single person was in lockdown at this time that I knew. And I think that was a sort of large pull for someone to sort of like process this socio-cultural moment that we're in. It was quite dire at the bit. Nobody sort of knew how to like understand it or talk about it or be And I think we were all, it was also at that stage of the pandemic where people were open to like, this is going to sound, but like when people were more willing to engage with like online art projects, I feel like now a lot of people that I know are like very tired. Whereas at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this excitement about Zoom plays and, you know, online things. And so I think that also fed into it as well.
Yeah, cool. So Grzegorz and Alexander, so yeah, a really interesting talk. So it's kind of interesting to kind of look at how these organizations, football organizations that are, you know, like they are kind of the whole idea is that people come together and watch a football game and they interact. So how are they going to communicate when even, you know, football matches aren't being played? So do you think that the changes, the kind of the strategies and the changes that so these football kind of football teams that they brought in, do you think that will change, or do you think that will remain in place even when kind of COVID is over and everybody can go and see football matches again?
Let me answer for your question, David. In totality, the strategy of relationship communication is constant, and it was before the coronavirus crisis, and it is now, and probably be the same in the future. So the differences are in details. So all these examples that we have presented are some kind of emanation of the situation that changed the ways of communication, but it is already now visible that the change is not permanent. Maybe some techniques will be and are already used more commonly and more likely, but it can be seen that as trainings and matches came back in May or June 2020, then communication techniques just came back to the normal. So the brief answer is no, the change is not permanent.
Okay, well that's quite interesting actually. Yeah, cool. I've got one from for Eliza from Josephine Coleman, and Josephine says she's interested in how fans and audiences become members of community. Are they always consciously identifying as such, or is it imposed?
So I have chosen Facebook groups because people want to join them on their own, and they have to be accepted. So they want to become a part of community, and it's important for these people to join the group, because if someone who moderates a group don't want them to join, they are rejected. So they identify as a part of community. Of course, there are many listeners who don't want to join this group, and they just want to listen and don't talk and exchange some posts or graphics or pictures and even fan arts on these groups. But a lot of listeners join these groups, and it's not imposed. But what's interesting, many of people who listen to and who identified with community want to join Patronite or Patreon, and they want to donate these hosts to make possible for this podcast to be on air for a long time. And it's some kind of I don't know how to say it properly, but a better group in a group. So they feel special. They want to have something extra. It's when I was observing that it's not only to be part of a community, but to be part of a special community. So it's very interesting how it is changing when they see who is the member of Patreon and who is not in this group.
Okay.
They are these people who donate more likely to be active on this group, even on Facebook.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Just a reminder from Agatha that on the left-hand side, it's where it says Expo. There's some movies there or films that you can view, and Agatha says her favourite, The Tax by Bo Kyung Kim. I think I said that correctly. I don't think any other questions have popped up. So yeah, thank you everybody. Really, really interesting to hear all your talks. Yeah, so thank you for coming along.